He was an S-rank adventurer, but he was just unlucky with his class and everything went wrong. Guilt, despair, death. His greatest enemy gave him another chance. Although he knows the future, he must become a monster and conquer the abyss. Now his path isn't just about survival, but fighting for an ideal future. Will he be able to fix everything? Let's find out. 20 years ago, an event changed the world. That day was recorded in history as the beginning of a new era of dungeons. The protagonist, Kiyomi Aki, looked at his sister's portrait in the locket and told her that he had finally reached S rank. After apologizing to her, he headed to the portal and went through it, finding himself in another world. Touching his bracelet, he looked at the system window with his information. He is 38 years old. Now his path isn't just about survival, but fighting for an ideal future. Will he be able to fix everything? Who were already waiting for his arrival entered with him. After walking through the dungeon for a while, they ran into a huge monster, a B-rank shadow wolf. The leader asked him for a favor, and he accepted. He then leaped and headed towards the claw of the monster. A second later, the wolf slammed its claw on the ground, but seeing no corpse, it started to look for the boy. Aki, meanwhile, hid behind a rock and thought that even common monsters have immense strength. He decided to take advantage of this and, coming out of his hiding spot, he jumped on the wolf and plunged a dagger into its body. This only enraged the monster. It turns out it could control its fur and cut Aki with it, so he was thrown right to the edge of the platform. The wolf growled loudly, already intending to devour him, but suddenly, the party leader cut off its head in a single blow. He then mockingly asked if he couldn't even handle that wolf. Level 50, and his class is assassin. But even these stats didn't please him, and he wondered if it was worth it. The party members and the girls said he did well for an assassin. They all laughed together, and he, while starting to clean his wound, thought to himself that he already knew he was weak. After choosing the class, it turned out the assassin wasn't designed for combat. Despite his enormous strength stats, his rank was the only thing he could boast about. And he did all this just to see a smile on his sister's face again. He had to find a medicine for her, and that was the only reason he remained an adventurer. However, the illness progressed quickly, and in the end, it took her life. But he still couldn't give up his usual way of life. This left him completely exhausted. He reached his limit, and to top it all off, it turned out that the assassin is the weakest class for clearing dungeons. Time passed. The adventurers conquered several rooms, and their leader, sitting on a corpse, said that was enough for today. They would return for tomorrow, and now they had to discuss the reward. The girl healed him instantly while Aki gritted his teeth and held his wounds. And then the party leader asked if he would mind going without a reward. He agreed, and the boy happily exclaimed that was great. It was enough for him to be accepted into the party. Aki didn't for tomorrow, and now they had to discuss the reward. The girl healed him instantly while Aki gritted his teeth and, because dungeons are full of hidden opportunities, the break ended, and they headed for the exit. Injured, he managed to get to his feet. Then a roar was heard from above, and the ceiling began to crumble. A huge monster came out from behind the pillar and blocked the path. Aki gaped at its size. In front of them was the S-rank mechanical dragon. The adventurers weren't scared, but only Aki understood that something wasn't right here. This boss was different from the previous ones. The team leader brandished his sword and charged into battle with the others, but in the first clash, they were overpowered and saw just how strong this monster was. They realized they needed to flee, and Aki thought that escaping was the smart move. The strength of this monster was enormous. While he was watching the monster, someone pushed him towards it, and he fell to the ground. He immediately turned around, and the team leader apologized to him with a smile. Then the dragon approached Aki and snapped its jaws shut. In front of them was the S-rank mechanical dragon. The adventurers weren't scared, but only Aki understood that something wasn't right here. But in the first clash, they were overpowered and saw just how strong this monster was. The real Aki was hiding behind a pillar at that moment. Fortunately, he managed to escape by leaving his double behind. While he was watching the monster, someone pushed him towards it, and he fell to the ground. He decided to run away. But suddenly, the dragon spoke. They would pass through the gate. Their end would be inevitable. Aki was shocked. Then Karul Khan's claw appeared beside him, after which he revealed himself and said it was time. He immediately turned around, and the team leader apologized to him with a smile. Then the dragon approached Aki and snapped its jaws shut, but Karul Khan replied that he could. Aki looked at him in horror, thinking that if monsters like him crossed the gate, it would all be over, so he couldn't allow it. He decided to stand in his way. The adventurers took advantage of this and fled. The team leader wanted to get rid of him after this mission anyway. Besides, he was useless. It shouted if he was willing to die for those who had abandoned him. It spat slime at him, but he dodged the attack and ended up behind it. Sensing this, the dragon spun around and struck with its claw. But again, it was a double. Aki was already far above it. At that moment, He landed on top of it and was about to strike, but suddenly his sword shattered against the dragon's armor, and he realized fighting it wouldn't be easy. He immediately turned around and the team leader apologized to him with a smile. Then the dragon approached Aki and snapped its jaws shut, sending him flying several yards and crashing into the wall. Trying to recover, he told himself to get it together. It must have a weak spot. He immediately turned around and the team leader apologized to him with a smile. Then the dragon approached Aki and snapped its jaws shut. When the beam hit the wall behind him, there was an explosion, and Aki realized where it was. Suddenly, he was blinded by a bright flash and noticed a magic symbol on the monster's neck. Its weak spot, it shouted if he was willing to die for those who had abandoned him. It spat slime at him, but he dodged the attack and ended up behind it. He shouted back that it wasn't his call to make, after which the dragon swung its claw and wounded him. But despite this, he continued to press on firmly toward his goal. Since his sword was broken, he activated the Phantom Sword. So, the dragon eliminated one of its clones, and at that moment he was already close and hit the weak spot. Then, an explosion was heard. Smoke poured from the dragon's mouth, and it was surprised that someone had managed to do something like that. But this attack took a lot out of Aki. He bet everything on victory. He smiled at the thought, but his strength was already at its limit. Not bad for the weakest class. He looked cool before he died. Meanwhile, the dragon was very pleased. It called the man's attack magnificent and admitted he was a strong opponent, creating a symbol in the air, which it also had on its neck. It told Aki that the time had come. They would see each other soon. In that symbol appeared the hands of a clock that began to turn, while Aki wondered if he had managed to help the world. Suddenly, a system window appeared stating that for killing the mechanical dragon Kurolkan, he received a reward. He vaguely saw a system window in front of him and wondered what it was and whose voice that was. The system informed him that there were no missions, and he, without trying to decipher what was written, closed his eyes and thought that it didn't matter anymore. It was time to die. But as he drifted off, a loud ringing was heard. He jumped out of bed and turned off the alarm clock, staring into space in shock. Unable to believe what was happening, he jumped out of bed again and ran to the bathroom. Only upon seeing his reflection in the mirror did he realize he was alive. And what's more, he was young. He touched his face and thought, was this that dragon's doing? That scream wasn't a hallucination. Upon returning to his room, he received a message on his phone. Unable to believe what was happening, he jumped out of bed again and ran to the bathroom. Only upon seeing his reflection in the mirror, he immediately composed himself and wiped his tears, saying that the most important thing is that she's alive. But as he drifted off, a loud ringing was heard. He jumped out of bed and turned off the alarm clock, staring into space in shock. Unable to believe what was happening, he jumped out of bed again and ran to the bathroom. Only upon seeing his reflection in the mirror did he realize he was alive. And what's more, he was young. He touched his face and thought, was this that dragon's doing? He decided to watch the news where they were talking about her illness. The number of patients continues to rise. Unable to believe what was happening, he jumped out of bed again and ran to the bathroom. Only upon seeing his reflection in the mirror, he immediately composed himself and wiped his tears, saying that the most important thing is that she's alive. But as he drifted off, a loud ringing was heard. He jumped out of bed and turned off the alarm clock, staring into space in shock. Unable to believe what was happening, he jumped out of bed again and ran to the bathroom. Only upon seeing his reflection in the mirror, now he no longer has the right to make a mistake. This time he won't let her die. The first thing he did, of course, was go to the hospital. He immediately composed himself and wiped his tears, saying that the most important thing is that she's alive. Unable to believe what was happening, he jumped out of bed again and ran to the bathroom. Only upon seeing his reflection in the mirror, he immediately composed himself and wiped his tears, saying that the most important thing is that she's alive. Now he no longer has the right to make a mistake. This time he won't let her die. The first thing he did, of course, was go to the hospital. But thanks to the old man and his dog, he had already completed 2 greetings and began to complete the other missions. He ran 10 kilometers uphill. He immediately composed himself and wiped his tears, saying that the most important thing is that she's alive. Now he no longer has the right to make a mistake. This time he won't let her die. The first thing he did, of course, was go to the hospital. He was surprised that he had leveled up to level 3 so easily. It usually takes a month to go up even 1 level. Aki already knew that those antibodies wouldn't work. The cure will only be found in the future in high-level dungeons. A system window appeared in front of him and informed him that there were new missions. Run 10 kilometers on an incline, do 20 pull-ups, and give 30 greetings. There, the receptionist gave him a bracelet to check his aptitude for the role. When he put on the bracelet, a window popped up showing he was 18 years old. He was a level 3 F-rank rookie. He confirmed that his level had indeed gone up, and the girl told him the bracelet let him choose a class, so he should be careful. He thanked her and thought that his skills would depend on the class he chose. He confidently declared that he would choose the classless class, which made the other adventurers laugh. asking if he wanted to clear dungeons from his couch, but they were laughing for nothing. They would later discover that it's the most versatile class. The guild employee smiled awkwardly and asked if he was sure about his choice. Maybe he should think it over, but he was no longer paying her any attention and looked at something on the system window, after which he went to the shop to buy a weapon. He was interested in a sword called Demon's Bite. At level 3, it's pretty light, and he doesn't have the sword skill yet. In the end, he bought the sword. Sure, it's a bit expensive, but it'll pay for itself in the future. Since the organizational part was over, it was time to head to the dungeon. Two rookie adventurers were staring at the portal in front of them and still didn't dare to go in, and a sweet old lady he had waved to placed a piece of candy in his hand. Afterwards, he went to the guild and registered as an adventurer. They decided he must be completely fearless. Passing through the portal, he felt a wave of nostalgia. He hadn't been here in a long time. Right away, he ran into some monsters, drew his sword, and sliced through several slimes. He managed to kill them with incredible ease. Even he was surprised by the difference in levels. He was popping them like bubbles. Afterwards, he found another opponent as a skeleton swordsman. He sliced through its bones with ease and thought about how much longer it would have taken him before. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he thought this was awesome and then started gathering magic stones. They're basically batteries that store energy. In his world, they're worth a lot. They're the whole reason people go into dungeons. Suddenly, a threatening roar echoed out. Behind him, a rare E-rank monster called Oros appeared. Aki launched himself into the attack, thinking it was a visitor that didn't show up in the dungeon often, but a strong one. Swinging his sword, he landed a blow, but the skeleton blocked it with a shield. Aki's hand trembled from the impact, but then the monster raised its shield, sending his weapon flying. Then Oros used a sweeping blow and immediately followed up with the blade dance skill, but Aki blocked every single one of its attacks. As he did this, he was completely calm, thinking this was the true strength of being classless. This is the same hidden power that would be discovered 15 years later. A classless person has a skill growth rate 10 times faster than other classes. While fighting Oros, he mastered his skills, sweeping blow, and blade dance. A high skill level allows him to master the enemy's technique. Luck was on his side. Leaving the monster weaponless, he struck it fatally, breaking its bones, after which a D-rank magic stone appeared on the ground. After that, he returned to the guild and the administrator noticed that he had returned quite early. He agreed with her and said it was a surprise for him too. And then she asked if he had a hard time for not having a class. He told her that wasn't the case at all and then placed a bag full of magic stones on the table, saying it was easy. Suddenly, one of the adventurers grabbed him by the shoulder and exclaimed, "How could a rookie like him have cleared the dungeon alone?" Clearly, he wasn't telling the whole story. The man grabbed him by his clothes, but he couldn't stand being treated like that and taught him a lesson, almost dislocating his arm. After that, the man went back to his friend without another word and asked if he really had no class. By that time, the girl had already calculated the value of the magic stones and credited the reward of 101,000 yen to his account. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of his eyes, informing him that an emergency quest was available, which made him very excited. It turns out the task was to sing in the square for 5 minutes, which really angered him, but he had no choice. He went out to the square and began to sing loudly, which attracted the attention of passers-by. Some started to record him and others laughed. There were more of the latter. He was as red as a tomato from embarrassment, but he kept singing because he would do anything to become stronger and save his sister. When the song ended, he would have barely leveled up for the first time. After that, he went to the beginner dungeon. The task was complete and he received a reward. A ring with a magic identification stone appeared in his palm. This is a very useful item. Deciding to check its stats, he thought that the skill level shows the compatibility with a given artifact. The higher the level, the greater the potential of the item being used. Now, his two-handed sword mastery was at level 8, and all his stats were between 70 and 120. He was very happy about this. It wasn't for nothing that he chose this class. If he hadn't chosen the classless class, the system reminded him that he had 4 unassigned stat points, and he decided to spend them all on luck. He fought slimes there using his new skills and then moved on to the skeletons. With his new techniques, everything went faster, and he was soon finished. At the end, he defeated several F-rank jumping slimes and skeleton swordsmen of the same level. Deciding that was enough for today, he looked at his status window. Now his mastery was at 10 and all his stats had increased by about 2 points. The system reminded him that he had 4 unassigned stat points, and he decided to spend them all on luck because it affects mastery and a high mastery level would allow him to learn skills from others. After collecting the magic stones, he decided to go home, but first he had to stop by the guild. Meanwhile, he defeated several F-rank jumping slimes and skeleton swordsmen of the same level. Deciding that was enough for today, immediately pointed his finger at him and exclaimed that he was quite strong. The guy thanked him and, placing his hand on Aki's shoulder, said that they were currently recruiting talented adventurers. He asked him if he wanted to join. The guy confirmed it, and then his gaze fell on the backpack he was carrying. Upon discovering that it was full of magic stones, he told her that it was just a class, and at that very moment, a girl appeared in the guild who caught everyone's eye. The main thing was his potential. They are from the Bloody Serpent clan, and one day they will be so strong that they will cross the abyss. An S-rank dungeon is the first and most dangerous dungeon that opened in this world. No one has ever managed to clear it, not now and not in the future. The guy asked, "So, what do you think about it? Should he join them?" The protagonist thanked him for the offer and turned it down. Then the guy put his arm around him, asking him not to refuse. "What's his class?" When he told him he has no class, the guy laughed and exclaimed that he is indecisive. Some guy was bothering the administrator and asking her if there was anyone strong there, and she was confused, and just saw Aki, after which he walked away, saying they don't need someone without a class. After that, the receptionist apologized to Aki. She didn't want to cause him any trouble, but he didn't mind and handed her a backpack so she could count everything. She was very surprised by the amount of magic stones and asked him if he really had no class. He told her that it was just a class, and at that very moment, a girl appeared in the guild who caught everyone's eye. She approached the counter and greeted them, and the protagonist thought she was cutting in line and asked her to wait, but actually, she approached him. He looked at her with a serious expression and thought she was pretty, and the girl said that she had overheard them by accident. He had really cleared the dungeons without a class. He confirmed it and asked why everyone was so concerned. She told him they were just curious. Why did he decide to become classless? Does this class really have any advantages? He vaguely replied that it was possible, which made her laugh. She liked that and decided to get to know him better. She is Alice Takagi from the Carnelian Rage clan and, believe it or not, she is an S-rank adventurer. He asked why such an important person would need a classless person like him. She told him that she did need him. They also want to conquer the abyss, and a talent like him would be very useful to her. He told her that it was just a class, and at that very moment, a girl appeared in the guild who caught everyone's eye, and told him that nobody cares about class. The main thing is that he's strong. He looked at her suspiciously. He shouldn't yet reveal the secret of mastery to just anyone. What should I do? He shook her hand and accepted, saying that her clan would be useful for achieving his goal. Suddenly, she pulled her hand back and set a condition. She told him that she did need him. They also want to conquer the abyss, and a talent like him would be very useful to her. He was pleasantly surprised. The protagonist immediately warned him that he was a rookie, but he didn't care. The receptionist called Aki and asked him to accept the payment for the stones. Then, he took out his phone and Alice looked at the screen and exclaimed in surprise, 90,000 from the starter dungeon. He told her not to look. He then headed for the exit and she ran after him, hinting that he should invite her, but he was unfazed. Soon he received an invitation and went to the dungeon, Icy Darkness. Upon crossing through the portal, gusts of cold wind and snow hit his face. He moved blindly through the blizzard, and through the howling wind he heard the crunching of the snow beside him. A dark silhouette appeared before his eyes, growing in size. The monster that had him in its sights, a polar bear, stood up and roared menacingly. The protagonist drew his sword and thought that he didn't expect to encounter it so soon. She used the right of S-rank adventurers to invite anyone, allowing him to participate in a higher-rank dungeon. He gritted his teeth in irritation. He was already sick of these idiotic tasks, but now was not the time. A huge claw from the monster was already looming over him. He jumped aside, dodging the blow, and noticed that at level 4 this was easier for him. Then he attacked with his sword with all his might, although not as hard as he wanted. This bear has thick skin, so he couldn't drag out the fight. He had no choice but to accept the quest, and so he held his breath. 49 seconds had already passed. He held his sword, and when the bear lunged at him with a roar, after which the system offered him a quest. Hold your breath for 60 seconds. Finally, the quest was completed and he immediately took a deep breath. He received a reward and his level rose to 5, after which he felt a surge of strength, and using the skill, Sword Dance, he cut off the monster's claw. Then he delivered a sweeping blow that finished it instantly. 49 seconds had already passed. He held his sword, and when the bear lunged at him with a roar. This skill grants resistance to cold. With this, it would be much easier for him to move through the dungeon. After that, he thought, the quest is terrible, of course, but I suspect all of this isn't without reason. However, that's not the main problem now. While he was thinking, he managed to get covered in snow, but he soon emerged. Upon noticing a nearby hare-like monster, an E-rank frost jumper, he chased it and struck at it with his sword with all his might. The agile hare quickly leaped away, and he looked with disgust at the long-eared animal that was mocking his attempts to catch it. He decided not to bother with it for now, and found a place to rest. Looking at the collected stones, he took out a thermos with a hot drink and thought he was doing well in the dungeon, all thanks to Alice. Here he could accumulate experience points. The image of Alice appeared before his eyes and he shook his head, pushing those thoughts away immediately. Now the most important thing was to save his sister. He decided that today he needed to go as deep as possible, but suddenly he heard a loud human scream. One of the adventurers was pinned against a wall of ice while his companion lay nearby in a pool of blood. A girl from their team named Naomi froze before the enormous monster, and when she saw it was about to strike her, she closed her eyes. Aki saved her just before the impact. He caught her and jumped aside, and the monster, a large version of those rabbits, followed him. He was pleased with his successful maneuver, then pulled out a handkerchief from his pocket, spread it out on the snow, and sat Nami down, telling her he would help. She melted right away at his actions. The adventurers were happy that the stranger had arrived and thought they were saved, but their opinion changed quickly when they learned he was classless. Their faces darkened and they thought they were going to die, and the protagonist said they were lucky he was around. Then, he took his sword and headed toward the hare, which immediately ran at him and raised its paws over its head. The hare delivered a blow that split the ground and Aki jumped aside, but several shards of ice flew at him. The hare didn't waste the opportunity and quickly closed in. Then, it opened its mouth and huge fangs grew out. When it tried to trap him, he leaped aside and increased the distance between them, thinking that rare monsters are just plain crazy. Suddenly, the boss roared, then leaped high into the air, and the protagonist cursed out loud. Luckily, he had put points into attack power. Using a combination slash, he attacked the monster and a blade flashed before its eyes, after which blood spurted out. Seeing chunks of flesh go flying, the girl was overjoyed and one of her companions asked, "He has a class? Where did he get the skill to wield a sword?" Aki remained silent. This was starting to irritate him, but he didn't show it. Approaching the girl, he asked if she was okay and told her to get up, which made her feel embarrassed. She got worried and wondered why he was helping her. Meanwhile, he asked, "She's the healer, right? Her comrades are injured, so have her heal them first." She reluctantly agreed and, while he sat looking over the loot he received, she began to heal. One of her companions said that he never expected to rely on a classless person and a healer. His words reminded the protagonist that back then healers weren't particularly valued either. The guy got angry and ordered Nami to hurry up because his whole body was in pain, which scared her, and she apologized. The other guy rolled up his sleeve and showed her his bloody hand, saying it was her fault they almost died, so she needed to hurry up. The guy got angry and ordered Nami to hurry up because his whole body was in pain. "You're going to face this dungeon alone." She cried, and suddenly, the protagonist walked over and told them to kick her out. This only made her feel worse. But when he said they clearly didn't value her there and invited her to join him, she resumed her treatment and Aki noted that they didn't notice how strong she was. Suddenly, the guy exclaimed, "Can you go any faster? If you don't hurry up." She looked at him, delighted, and burst into tears, after which she exclaimed in embarrassment, "Is this a marriage proposal?" He held out his hand and asked with a smile, "You believe me, right?" Looking at him, she realized there was something about him that the others didn't have. He told her she was mistaken and then added that she had great potential and with his help, she would unlock it, after which he said a brief goodbye and left, leaving her confused. From the dungeon, after which she took his hand and confidently declared that she believed him. He promised that he wouldn't let her down. He went straight to the guild, and the receptionist, upon seeing the magic stones, asked in surprise. That way he could enter the D-rank dungeon without any issues. The magic stones were transferred. The girl turned around and pointed out that it was the first time a classless person had ranked up. An E-rank can try their luck in a D-rank dungeon. From this moment on, he's no longer a rookie. Seeing the money in his account, he again thought he was on a good pace, after which he decided to buy a gift for his sister. Time passed. After buying a box of cupcakes, he knocked on the hospital room door for his sister, and a passing nurse was surprised to see so many sweets. Since Natsu didn't answer, he entered the room and found her asleep. He smiled, holding her, thinking she was adorable. He then caressed her head and sat beside her, telling her mentally that this time he would succeed. He would not let her die. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. His encounter with that girl was not a coincidence. Her power would be useful for treating his sister. He decided to put the cupcakes in the refrigerator, but since they didn't fit, he ate some. And a passing nurse was surprised and thought, he's eating all these sweets by himself. Soon, the afternoon came. He went out and called Alice, who was waiting for this. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. His encounter with that girl was not a coincidence. Her power would be useful for treating his sister. He decided to put the cupcakes in the refrigerator. She said she knew her intuition wasn't wrong and then asked if he wanted to receive another invitation. He replied that that wasn't entirely true. There was a person who needed help leveling up and she, he believed, had many connections. This girl was a promising healer, and he wanted her to join a party with a necromancer. Alice sighed and smiling, pointed out that he had something in mind and asked if he had managed to intrigue her. He thought that the synergy between the healer and the necromancer would help her develop faster, but that was uncertain. Alice accepted his request, but he would owe her a favor. That's why he was thinking of leaving the business. But since he had promised to help the healer, he had to accept. The girl laughed and promised she would do her best, after which the call ended and she looked at the phone, thinking he was mysterious. A new day dawned. The administrator formally congratulated Aki on his promotion to E rank. Upon receiving his reward, he thanked her and was about to leave, but seeing his cold reaction, she exclaimed that reaching E rank is an achievement. Not everyone makes it. Suddenly, a commotion started to their left. People saw the imprisoned adventurers in front of them. The criminal adventurers are called revenants. They always inspire fear in others. The administrator sighed and said that few people would agree to accompany the revenants. She then returned to her work and muttered that they were nothing but a nuisance. To her surprise, Aki offered to accompany them. She warned him that it was dangerous, but he was sure he could handle it. Besides, this job pays well. He knows how to deal with specters. Don't follow their example. Maintain authority. Don't engage in conversation. The girl looked at him with concern and accepted his help, saying it would be a great help, after which she handed him a form to fill out. Afterward, everyone went outside and the criminals were put collars. The police officer gave Aki a special bracelet and explained how to use it. He just had to press a button to calm them down. Putting it on, he thought that even talented criminals were allowed to participate in dungeon raids. The officer advised him to fry them good with electricity if he noticed anything suspicious. And one of the criminals overheard this and indignantly exclaimed that they had feelings too. The cop standing next to him ordered him to shut up, after which they approached the protagonist and one of them asked what his name was, saying he could introduce himself without any problem. Aki stated his name and asked them not to speak to him anymore, after which their shackles were removed and they headed towards the portal. The criminals, their eyes on their new caretaker, were clearly plotting something. They entered a Hell's Depths ranked dungeon. One of them wiped his sweat and said that it was hot in there. The government had gone completely insane. His partner told him to stop complaining. Then he smiled and said that they finally got their chance. They froze and looked at the protagonist with malicious grins. He pressed the bracelet, but it didn't work. He looked at a criminal, called him an idiot, and asked if this was his doing. They took off the collars from their necks and prepared for battle, saying that he would have to die. Aki drew his sword and the system announced the activation of an emergency quest. He needed to kill the enemies who attacked him. The quest was bloodthirsty and, as always, appeared right on time. Before the fight could begin, a fire snake, a D-rank monster, appeared from the lake. It let out a loud roar and attacked them. Fighters have simply terrible skill stats. Victory is inevitable. Looking at the guy with an axe, this guy knocked the monster down with a single punch and told it not to interfere when adults are deciding a loser's fate. The protagonist immediately realized he had a fighter class and smiled, thinking that this would be easier than he thought. He prepared for the fight, and one of the men clenched his fist and lunged at him. He missed and hit a rock that shattered into pieces from the impact. Aki was surprised by this. While he was fighting this man, his companions dug up a suitcase with the necessary equipment to escape and fight. Now armed, they decided to attack him together, and the protagonist thought it was a done deal. According to the appraisal ring, the fighter class receives almost no bonuses from items. This is the class that relies on its base stats. The man struck him with a punch that he blocked, but his hands trembled. Afterwards, another opponent rushed at him immediately and raised his sword above his head. He tried to strike him but couldn't break his defense, after which he increased the distance between them and thought that they had their weaknesses too. Fighters have simply terrible skill stats. Victory is inevitable. Looking at the guy with an axe, he decided to start with that fool and lunged at him, but the guy blocked his sword with the axe and laughed, after which he swung his weapon. Luckily, Aki managed to duck, but he didn't notice the fat guy approaching him from behind. He hit him in the back with his forehead, causing him to fall and roll on the ground, and then he cursed silently, thinking that fighting against a crowd isn't so easy. However, he could feel how weak they were. Regaining his composure, he picked up his sword. He took a deep breath and prepared for battle, thinking that victory was in his hands. The leader of the Revenants noticed that this guy wasn't so simple and told the others to be careful. He decided to start with that fool and lunged at him, but the guy blocked his sword with the axe and laughed. He took a deep breath and prepared for battle, thinking that victory was in his hands. The protagonist successfully dodged the blow and turned his gaze to the criminal the snake was heading for. And to his surprise, then he used his enhancement skills body and landed a devastating blow on his opponent's shoulder, making him scream in pain. The leader of the Revenants noticed that this guy wasn't so simple and told the others to be careful. His blade sank so deeply that it killed the guy instantly, and he thought that, as always, the timing was perfect. The protagonist successfully dodged the blow and turned his gaze to the criminal the snake was heading for. And to his surprise, launched several energy attacks that dealt no damage because of the armor. The fat man recognized his techniques. It was a skeleton technique. Where did a classless idiot get a skill like that? He wanted to hit him again with his forehead, but instead he hit a rock and looked at it in surprise because his opponent had just been there. Meanwhile, The protagonist was already on top of him, raised his sword, then came down and landed a powerful blow. One of the criminals called Aki an idiot and ordered him to show what he was capable of, and he approached. The protagonist, without waiting, body enhancement is the best skill. Seeing his comrades die, the man got nervous and exclaimed, "Who is he? Why is a classless idiot treating them like children? This isn't what they signed up for." Now he could enjoy it to his heart's content. Seeing what he did to his comrade, the fat man rushed at him and Aki. Using his sword dance, the fat man grabbed his leg. He was alive. Holding the guy in place, he told his partner to finish him off, and he, gathering his courage, launched an attack, after which he threw something in his face. The fresh wound on his forehead began to bleed. From the impact, Aki was thrown back and rolled on the ground, delighting the criminals, finishing off the criminal. In the end, there was one more left. He himself didn't expect to have jumped so high. After all, he immediately regained his senses, which surprised his opponents. Leaning on his sword, he stood up. He had strength because he had sworn to himself that he would never let his sister die. Wiping the blood from his face, he used his body enhancement and shouted that he wouldn't lose to idiots like them. Lunging forward, he finished off those criminals, leaving only bloody corpses. The system reported that the task was successfully completed. He received a reward. A key appeared, which the system offered to let him use, but he decided not to rush just yet. After that, he dragged the bodies of the revenants out of the dungeon, and since he had spent a lot of energy fighting them, he shouted the name of Akira and called him an idiot, which made the protagonist frown. Someone was supporting them. Suddenly. Meanwhile, Akira called someone to find out what was happening. The man he apologized, explaining that someone had intervened, and Akira wondered who that scumbag was. He gave him some information, and the guy asked mockingly, "You're kidding." The man told him it was accurate information. A classless ranker did this. He shouldn't have done that. Meanwhile, Akira called someone to find out what was happening. The man he apologized, his blade sank so deeply that it killed the guy instantly, and he thought that, as always, the timing was perfect. Everything was spinning before his eyes. He realized he was starting to lose consciousness, but when he remembered his sister, he won't calm down until he gets his revenge. This guy's full name is Akira Bobozono. He's a streamer and a model, which is why he needs to get stronger. He can't afford to take any risks. After finishing his push-ups, he took the key he had received and wondered what it was for. The system offered to let him use it, and he accepted, after which a portal appeared beside him and he was dragged inside. Seeing the golden sands and enormous rocks before him, he realized he was in a dungeon called the Sunstone Labyrinth, which is why he needs to get stronger. He can't afford to take any risks. After finishing his push-ups, he took the key he had received and wondered what it was for. It was sand, but he pulled an amber magic stone with an insect inside from his pants. He tried to get up, but suddenly felt grit under his clothes and started shaking it off in irritation. When he fell, sand got in everywhere it could. Time passed. He wandered through the dungeon, enduring the scorching Sunday. Wiping the sweat from his face, he noticed there were no monsters anywhere, and that smelled like trouble. He took a step and an unexpected sound was heard, a crunching sound like he had stepped on something. He decided to check what was hidden beneath the sand and unearthed a blue magic stone, and he immediately realized where he was. This was a dungeon with resources. He dropped to his knees and dug into the sand, thinking this couldn't be happening. This dungeon was extremely rare. Here you could find the rarest magic stones, including the one that would save his sister. Time passed. He unearthed many magic crystals. His hands were bleeding and he was exhausted. Finally, he found what he was looking for, the moon magic stone. He picked it up in astonishment and smiled, realizing he wasn't imagining it. With this, his sister would finally recover. It was all thanks to the key he received for completing the quest. The illness that afflicted Natsu would later be called the magic vortex. The only substance capable of fighting this affliction was the extract from the moon magic stone. To create a cure, 10 of these stones were needed. He had taken the first step. He still had to find 9 more. With renewed vigor, he kept digging, but no matter how long he searched, he couldn't find another one. He slammed his hand on the sand. Desperate, he caught his breath. The system informed him that his time was up. It was sand, but he pulled an amber magic stone with an insect inside from his pants. He tried to grip the sand and begged the system to wait, yelling that he wasn't finished yet, but the portal was stronger. It sucked him in and returned him home, crashing to the floor, or more specifically, to the appraisal department where they inspect magic stones. His bloody palms stained the white walls, and he hung his head in despair, believing he wasn't good enough. After calming down, he lay on the bed and looked at the moonstone, thinking that in all that time he had only found one. He closed his eyes and replayed the events that led him to the key in his mind, realizing that he needed to return to the dungeon with resources. The key is probably awarded for very dangerous tasks, but it's a small price to pay to save his sister. Suddenly, he heard a rustling sound behind him. At first, he thought it was sand, but he pulled an amber magic stone with an insect inside from his pants. In the end, he has this and the moonstone. Everything else is just junk to sell. He decided to show this amber to the appraiser, after which he went to take a shower. But as soon as the water touched his injured hands, he screamed in pain. The next day, he went to the hospital to see his sister and brought her something again. She was very happy to see him, and when he told her he had a gift for her, she clapped excitedly. But when he showed her a pendant made from the moonstone, she wasn't thrilled. Natsu apologized and smiled awkwardly, saying she didn't need it. He was very surprised and exclaimed, "What's wrong?" She told him the pendant was a bit tacky. This upset him greatly, and he decided to leave. But in the end, he clarified, "Are you sure you don't need it?" She confirmed it and wished him luck at work. After that, he left the hospital room and, with tears in his eyes, put on the pendant himself. This upset him greatly, and he decided to leave. But in the end, he clarified, "Are you sure you don't need it?" He slammed his hand on the sand. Desperate, he caught his breath. The system informed him that his time was up. Just imagine it. He's young and wouldn't have to work. He was a master of his craft. For a second, he feared the man had read his mind. He slammed his hand on the sand. Desperate, he caught his breath. The system informed him that his time was up. It was sand, but he pulled an amber magic stone with an insect inside from his pants. This upset him greatly, and he decided to leave. But in the end, he clarified, "Are you sure you don't need it?" Aki mentally called it trash, and the appraiser said that was strange. It seemed like he didn't care. This is the amber magic stone of Chiwe. He shouldn't underestimate it. The protagonist got an idea. What would happen if he enchanted a sword with this stone? He asked the appraiser about it, and the appraiser told him he didn't know. What would happen if he enchanted a sword with this stone? He asked the appraiser about it, and the appraiser told him he didn't know, after which he pointed to the moon magic stone and said he'd like to know more about it, but to let him see this first. Just imagine it. He's young and wouldn't have to work. The appraiser shrugged and said he wouldn't know until he tried it himself. The protagonist smiled and asked if he could enchant the sword. The man agreed, and after a while, handed him the enchanted sword. Aki mentally called it trash, and the appraiser said that was strange, telling him to do as he pleased. Now he had to test it, but he didn't know where. The guild had a room. Just imagine it. He's young and wouldn't have to work. The appraiser shrugged and said he wouldn't know until he tried it himself, telling him to do as he pleased. Now he had to test it, but he didn't know where. The guild had a room. He looked at the fluffy monster without fear and, with a single slash of his sword, cut it in half. Aki rubbed his chin and said that he knew that Chi absorbed the souls of the monsters whose blood it drank, gaining their power. Is this stone capable of granting the same ability? A fluffy, E-rank monster appeared. It looked adorable, but its huge mouth and sharp fangs confirmed that appearances can be deceiving. The training grounds, the summoner's hall. The guild worker, a young mage, called out to Aki. He asked, "Can you only summon weak monsters?" His words got to her, and she decided to show him her power. From now on, she would summon monsters until he gave up. At that very moment, a guy and a girl named Yuki entered the training hall and asked for permission to join. Aki rubbed his chin and said that he knew that Chi absorbed the souls of the monsters whose blood it drank, gaining their power. Is this stone capable of granting the same ability? So they had to wait. The man pulled a black card from his pocket and asked, "And what if I request a mass summon?" Aki rubbed his chin and said that he knew that Chi absorbed the souls of the monsters whose blood it drank, gaining their power. Is this stone capable of granting the same ability? Not to mention a VIP client, and the protagonist wasn't opposed to getting free monsters either. Upon hearing his consent, the training grounds, the summoner's hall. The guild worker, a young mage, called out to Aki, so they had to wait. The man pulled a black card from his pocket and asked, "And what if I request a mass summon?" The training grounds, the summoner's hall. The guild worker, a young mage, called out to Aki, so they had to wait. The man pulled a black card from his pocket and asked, "And what if I request a mass summon?" After which the man and his companion drew their weapons and began to fight. Noticing that the adventurers were approaching, a fluffy, E-rank monster appeared. It looked adorable, but its huge mouth and sharp fangs confirmed that appearances can be deceiving, but he blocked it. He then swung at its legs, knocking it down. Afterwards, he raised a dagger and stabbed it in the chest, causing a scream that echoed through the hall, and he turned to his friend, happily telling her that he had already killed one. She showed him her bloody blade and told him that she had as well. A fluffy, E-rank monster appeared. It looked adorable, but its huge mouth and sharp fangs confirmed that appearances can be deceiving. But upon seeing a pile of corpses on the ground and the protagonist standing among them, he froze in shock. He raised a dagger and stabbed it in the chest, causing a scream that echoed through the hall, and he turned to his friend. A fluffy, E-rank monster appeared. It looked adorable, but its huge mouth and sharp fangs confirmed that appearances can be deceiving. But upon seeing a pile of corpses on the ground and the protagonist standing among them, he froze in shock. He raised a dagger and stabbed it in the chest, causing a scream that echoed through the hall, and he turned to his friend. A fluffy, E-rank monster appeared. It looked adorable, but its huge mouth and sharp fangs confirmed that appearances can be deceiving. But the summoner stopped him and said that his movements didn't seem like an E-ranker's. This is incredible. Who is he? Of all monsters. However, now his strength will increase with every kill, and that's very good. Upon leaving the locker room, a fluffy, E-rank monster appeared. It looked adorable, but its huge mouth and sharp fangs confirmed that appearances can be deceiving. He saw the guild workers running around in alarm. One of them noticed him and asked, "Are you an adventurer?" He raised a dagger and stabbed it in the chest, causing a scream that echoed through the hall, and he turned to his friend. Just in time, a system window appeared with an emergency quest, which made him happy. He raised a dagger and stabbed it in the chest, causing a scream that echoed through the hall, and he turned to his friend. He saw the guild workers running around in alarm. One of them noticed him and asked, "Are you an adventurer?" He went to the locker room for his things, and the man hurried him along. The next station is Shibuya. He raised a dagger and stabbed it in the chest, causing a scream that echoed through the hall, and he turned to his friend. After he confirmed, the worker informed him that there was another dungeon break, so all adventurers had to go to the dungeon urgently. He went to the locker room for his things, and the man hurried him along. The next station is Shibuya. He raised a dagger and stabbed it in the chest, causing a scream that echoed through the hall, and he turned to his friend. Even though he had just saved her, she ran off and, with tears in her eyes, shouted that they were all going to die while he watched her run away, bewildered, wondering if she was serious. Meanwhile, the rest of the adventurers ran into a serious opponent. One had already broken formation to attack it. A D-rank hobgoblin raided a store, ate something, and emerged from the darkness. Meanwhile, the rest of the adventurers ran into a serious opponent. One had already broken formation to attack it. He thought they just happened randomly. The man told him not to just stand there. They needed help on the front lines. The protagonist agreed, but he had no intention of running. He drew a sword from behind his back and confidently introduced himself, also stating his class. And then the man, surprised, thought he would just get in the way. Suddenly, a car flew towards him. Seeing this, he got very scared, but at the last moment, he managed to jump aside. Meanwhile, the hobgoblin was laughing. It liked the show and started to clap happily. And Aki thought that this type of monster has high attack power. He thought they just happened randomly. The man told him not to just stand there. They needed help on the front lines. The protagonist agreed. They need to finish it off and fast. After catching his breath, he got up and told him that it was all easy to say. But the protagonist paid him no mind and said he would distract it. Seeing this, he got very scared, but at the last moment, he managed to jump aside. Meanwhile, the hobgoblin was laughing. He thought they just happened randomly. The man told him not to just stand there. They needed help on the front lines. The protagonist agreed. And then the man, surprised, thought he would just get in the way. Suddenly, a car flew towards him. He thought they just happened randomly. The man told him not to just stand there. They needed help on the front lines. The protagonist agreed. And then the man, surprised, thought he would just get in the way. Suddenly, a car flew towards him. Seeing as the enemy brandished its sword, he cursed. The protagonist arrived just in time, ran the goblin through with his sword. He got up and told him that it was all easy to say. But the protagonist paid him no mind and said he would distract it. He thought they just happened randomly. The man told him not to just stand there. They needed help on the front lines. The protagonist agreed, trying to understand what he was trying to say, looked at the monster's back and finally understood what he had to do, since its entire back was exposed, but suddenly a noise was heard from the side. Several high-rank adventurers ran down the street, and the man happily said that the cavalry was here. He got up and told him that it was all easy to say, but the protagonist paid him no mind and said he would distract it. It was the perfect place to attack. So he plunged his sword into the goblin, but this only enraged it. It turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. He asked if he was okay and if he could keep fighting, and the man looked at him in surprise. The portal had already been cordoned off, and as the protagonist observed it, the man ran up to him, caught his breath, and asked why he had followed him. He told him it was because he was going to go to a dangerous place alone. The protagonist commented that he was kind, but also foolish. It turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. He's taking risks too. He confidently clenched his fist and offered him a drink when it was all over, and Aki smirked. He asked if he was okay and if he could keep fighting, and the man looked at him in surprise. The man was curious why he decided to enter the dungeon, and he told him he wanted to find out the cause of the breach. He asked if he was okay and if he could keep fighting, and the man looked at him in surprise. It turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. He asked if he was okay and if he could keep fighting, and the man looked at him in surprise. It turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. They needed to ensure the safety of the civilians. Saying he understood, Aki started running, and the man, panicking, it turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. They needed to ensure the safety of the civilians. Saying he understood, Aki started running, and the man, panicking, it turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. It crawled out of the portal, deciding to get rid of him. And the man, horrified, raised his weapon and said that he seemed to have triggered the death flag. The protagonist watched the monster, gripping his sword tightly. The man ran up to him, caught his breath, and asked why he had followed him. He told him it was because he was going to go to a dangerous place alone, that they needed to ensure the safety of the civilians. Saying he understood, Aki started running, and the man, panicking, that they needed to ensure the safety of the civilians. Saying he understood, Aki started running, and the man, panicking, the monster used its skill again. The adult adventurer yelled that this would be its tastiest strike. It turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. That they needed to ensure the safety of the civilians. Saying he understood, Aki started running, and the man, panicking, it turned around in disgust, and the adventurer, upon meeting its gaze, shuddered with fear. That they needed to ensure the safety of the civilians. Saying he understood, Aki started running, and the man, panicking, that they needed to ensure the safety of the civilians. Saying he understood, Aki started running, and the man, panicking. The protagonist thought that dragons don't burn their throats because they have a magical point in their throat. That's where they launch their magic from. He must hit that spot. The man ran up to him, caught his breath, and asked why he had followed him. He told him it was because he was going to go to a dangerous place alone. The protagonist commented that he was kind, but also foolish. The protagonist landed several blows on his enemy, and cracks appeared on the scales. With another strong hit, this wouldn't be easy. Eco Kurulkan prepared its breath attack. The protagonist thought that dragons don't burn their throats because they have a magical point in their throat. That's where they launch their magic from. He must hit that spot. Aki looked at him in surprise. He shouted, "It's okay, I can only help with this." The protagonist smiled and pointed out that would be enough. Suddenly, Eco Kurulkan collapsed on the ground. The adult adventurer shouted in surprise, "What happened?" The protagonist pointed out that it was because of the attack. He used the technique he learned from the Hoblin. The monster growled, expressing its displeasure and anger. The protagonist brandished his sword and dealt a devastating blow to Eco Kurulkan. The system window reported that the defense points were absorbed. His level has increased to 7. The emergency task has been completed. He can receive his reward. Aki activated the reward, and the system window reported that it was the adventurer's key. The protagonist thought that he would encounter monsters like Eco Kurulkan more than once. The adult adventurer asked what it was. The protagonist silently put the key away and began to clean his weapon with a cloth. He said with a smile that he was apologizing. He shouldn't meddle in other people's business, and that's why he has no luck with girls. The protagonist let out a short laugh. The adult adventurer grabbed his neck with his hand and cheerfully asked if he wasn't going to object. Aki smiled as he laughed. The office chief asked in surprise, "Was this their doing?" The adult adventurer affirmed, pointing at Aki with his index finger, that it was mostly his doing. He used the device and said, "Aki, right? I'll remember that." The breakthrough stopped, the gate stabilized. Do you know what this is connected to? The protagonist thought that this time he wouldn't be able to get out of the situation. The protagonist said that by killing the monster, the gate returned to normal. The office chief commented, "This was interesting. The breakthrough was considered a random event. Was there a reason for it?" The protagonist said he couldn't know. He was just saying what he had personally seen. Afterwards, Aki left with the adult adventurer. The killer noticed he was leaving. Did he really want to let him go? He could, to extract information from him. Of course, there would be a price to pay for this. The branch manager pointed out that there was no need for that. The protagonist said he couldn't know. He was just saying what he had personally seen. Afterwards, Aki left with the adult adventurer. The Chinese swordswoman asked if this was about money. The sorceress said with a smile that she was already scared. The adults were just crazy. She said they needed strong fighters. A great battle awaited them. This could be their calling card. Then, the chief called Bobono and asked him to join them. "Can you do me a favor?" After a while, in the protagonist's room, he was packing his things in his backpack when a message arrived on his phone. He picked up the phone and read that they were pleased to inform him that he had been promoted to D rank. He thought with a smile that he was now level 7 and D rank. That was great. Everything was going according to plan. Afterward, his sister sent him a link to an article that said they needed to meet the future star, the classless Aki, and the healer Naomi. Aki thought that she was doing well too. A message from his sister appeared on the phone screen. Was he really classless? The protagonist replied that he had a good reason for it. After a moment, he thought with a smile that he was now level 7 and D rank. That was great. Everything was going according to plan. Afterward, the Chinese swordswoman asked if this was about money. The sorceress said with a smile that she was already scared. The protagonist thought about it and chose yes. He wanted to continue. The window said, "Good choice. Welcome." Suddenly, a door appeared and pulled Aki inside. Shortly after, the protagonist arrived in the throne room. A window from the system showed that it was an A-rank dungeon, Alfheim. The protagonist thought, what kind of dungeon is this? The Elven King noticed that he was a human guided by the will of God. His name. The protagonist thought, what will of God are we talking about? Is this a quest? Aki introduced himself and said he came here to find the lunar magic stone. He asked to cure the magical disease, so it was true. If he wanted, he could make healing potions, but the lunar magic stone is also valuable to them. The protagonist furiously asked if they wanted him to take it by force. The Elven King smiled and said that was quite a reaction. The will of God has guided an adventurer. The servant looked at his king and asked what the problem was. Then, the Elven King asked, is it possible? He's classless. Is this information accurate? The protagonist asked if there was a problem. He said it was not a concern. The Elven King said thoughtfully that the will of God is never wrong. Your task will be a duel with a sinner. He asked what that meant, and the king explained that the sinner's crime was killing its own kind. This monster enjoys killing peaceful citizens. It uses magic to sow chaos and destruction in settlements. For them, killing their own kind is a terrible sin. Aki asked, crossing his arms, that's why you need an outsider, right? The king noted that his judgment was correct and that they would reward him if he fulfilled their request. The protagonist smiled and said, holding out his hand, that he accepted. The Elven King rose from his throne and shook the man's hand, saying that the duel would take place tomorrow. Until then, he suggested that he explore the city. The protagonist, he asked, you have a city? On a city street, an elf greeted Aki and offered him a tour of the city. The protagonist found this unusual. Is this really a dungeon? She said that this dungeon is special. Every 10 years, guests from other worlds arrive here. He then asked, what happened to the guests? The elf noted with a smile that they died. The protagonist said that he understood now. The protagonist thought that she spoke of death so calmly. After a while, the elves in the square were applauding loudly. She pointed out that there seemed to be some kind of event going on. Do you want to take a look? The protagonist said he wouldn't mind taking a look. The street performer said they could come closer. He wanted to show them an interesting little spell. He used skill enhancement and launched a fireball into the sky. Then he made it explode in midair. Aki thought in surprise that it was impressive, and it was a fireball. The street performer pointed out with a bow that it was magic that temporarily strengthened his spells and abilities. The elf smiled as the elves applauded that it was a newly invented spell. The system window informed him that he had learned skill enhancement. The protagonist applauded with a smile and thought it was great. He had easily received a useful enhancement. This was already a good start. As night fell in the city market, the elf pointed out that that was all for today. The protagonist said he would like to look around more tomorrow. She said with a smile that she would be happy to do so, if he managed to survive the duel. Of course. The protagonist looked at her with a grim expression and then said goodbye to her. A while later, in the arena, Aki was waiting for his opponent on the field. A huge elf was brought into the arena and the protagonist thought, what did they feed him? The sinner asked with a mocking smile if killing him would be justified, right? He used a macrophelnus spell that enveloped the skies in dark energy with a magic circle. The protagonist gritted his teeth and thought, can he really change the weather? A while later, in the arena, Aki was waiting for his opponent on the field. A huge elf was brought into the arena and the protagonist thought, what did they feed him? The sinner asked with a mocking smile if killing him would be justified. The protagonist covered his face with his hand, thinking it was a curse. As if under a waterfall, he gripped the hilt of the sword with both hands. The opponent cast Noctiscaria and a viscous substance appeared under his feet. As a result, the protagonist was trapped. His feet sank into the ground up to his waist. Aki thought, sinking deeper and deeper into the earth. What kind of sorcery is this? The protagonist shouted, trying to free himself, that it was a curse. The elves on the platform cheerfully called for him to be killed. The sinner asked what was wrong with the man. It had barely begun. He shouted with a malicious smile that he was a greedy idiot. He should fear his overwhelming power. The servant pointed out that it was still too difficult for humans. The Elf King said that it didn't matter. The main thing was that none of the elves died. The protagonist thought that at this rate his head would end up hanging over the fireplace. He activated body strengthening and the enhancement of skills and was able to escape the trap. Aki thought he was lucky to have met that street performer. Now it was easier for him to move. The protagonist used the skill sword dance, unleashing energy in the form of a crescent moon upon his enemy. The sinner blocked the blow with ice magic and, directing the magic at him, said that human magic is so primitive. The system window reported that the passive skill, Ice Defense, was activated. Grand Frost Ward, he shouted, using his skills, saying that now he would show his full power. The sinner cast the spell. Crystallis, Chimeras, and shards of ice appeared over the protagonist's head, falling on him. An ice block formed in the arena, and the elves in the stands exclaimed jubilantly. He shouted that the show was over. Now he is a free elf. The sinner asked, turning to the ruler, "Is it true?" The elf king remained silent, and the block of ice shattered from a powerful energy. Everyone looked at the block of ice, surprised. The protagonist used a sweeping blow to free himself. He asked with a mocking smile, "So that means he managed to survive. That's actually good." Aki thought that this elf isn't as strong as he thinks he is. He reminds him of someone. The sinner stated that at least he would have some fun. He said, creating an orb of dark energy in his hand, that it was time to raise the stakes. He would show him true skill, the protagonist thought, smiling. So he decided to strengthen his skills. He wants to see how far he can go. In any case, I know how to defeat him. The protagonist recalled once meeting a foolish elf in the dungeon who set his own hair on fire with his own spell and ran off in a panic, probably thinking that he had cast it. Back then, he didn't understand magic. I see a chance for victory. The protagonist looked at the audience, and the sinner shouted that he shouldn't get distracted from the fight. Suddenly, the protagonist closed the distance between them. Aki used his skills and tried to strike him, but he dodged, smiling. The sinner used magic and dodged the next blow. He asked, "Is this really all you can do?" The protagonist smiled and, suddenly, the elf's hair began to fall out. The sinner stared at him. His hair had completely changed. The spectators watched in surprise. He grabbed his head and shouted, "What the hell is going on?" The protagonist pointed out that most of an elf's mana was concentrated in their hair, or didn't he know that? At that moment, the sky over the arena cleared and everything became clear. The protagonist shouted, running towards him, that he must die. The elf tried to cast a spell, furious, but it didn't work. He said, scared, that he no longer had any power. Aki dealt a devastating blow to his opponent with his sword. A system window appeared, reporting that 10 units of magical power were absorbed. The Elf King declared that the sinner had been defeated. "You must praise the adventurer, give thanks to the gods for sending him." Then he said, shaking his hand, that he had managed to take care of him. The Elf King asked in a low voice how he knew their magic was in their hair. "I had to keep it a secret, and, in return, I will give you this." The system window reported that it was a magic stone of the abyss. The protagonist shouted, surprised. It really was a magic stone from the abyss. He mentioned wondering where he knew him from, though it wasn't important. He could show it to the enchanter. He would know how to use it. He shouldn't forget about it. The protagonist said he would keep his promise to guard his secret. The Elf King said, as the servant handed over the bag, that it was a moon magic stone. The protagonist happily took the bag with the reward. He noted that for his services, he would give him something more. "This is the recipe for the moon magic stone." Aki shouted in surprise. He was serious. He wanted to know more about it. Suddenly, a portal appeared and started to suck him in. The Elf King said that he was bidding him farewell. If the gods were kind, they would meet again. Later, in the room, the protagonist pointed out that most of an elf's mana was concentrated in their hair, or didn't he know that? At that moment, the sky over the arena cleared and everything became clear. "This is the recipe for the moon magic stone." Aki shouted in surprise. He was serious. If the gods were kind, they would meet again. Later, in the room, he turned on the screen with the remote where the protagonist was training intensely. They looked at the television screen in surprise. The protagonist asked, "So, a recipe for a magic stone exists? Will they really be able to overcome the magic vortex?" The protagonist apologized. He thought he would have time. Why were they contacting him? The office chief said he wanted to offer him a job. The protagonist asked what the job entailed. He said they were gathering the country's best adventurers for this and that Alice had recommended him. He hoped he wouldn't refuse. The protagonist said he got the general idea. However, he wanted to know the details of the job. The office chief said that it was classified information, so he asked him not to share it with any third parties. He sent the information to his phone. Aki asked what it was. He said it was data on adventurer deaths. The protagonist's expression changed as he noticed that the list included PK adventurers. The office chief said it was hard to believe, but it was a fact. It included accidents during adventures, but that wasn't what he wanted to talk about. The protagonist asked if they were talking about player killers, right? Their expressions changed as if he had hit a nerve. He said with a smile that he was surprised Aki knew about that. The information had not yet been made public. Aki asked what it was. He said it was data on adventurer deaths. The office chief called out to him. Aki asked what was going on. He asked him to get dressed. There is an organization made up of PKs, and they've taken the bait. They just have to spring the trap. The protagonist said that he understood everything. He smiled and said he was glad to be working with a person who understood it all. The office chief said the mission was dangerous, but the reward would be fitting. His reputation would also grow. Besides, he had recently spent a lot on hospital bills, right? In his opinion, it was a good offer. The protagonist thought, so they know about my sister, and said that he would take part in this mission. They could send him the operation plan so he could prepare. He said he was ready. He said with a smile that he was surprised Aki knew about that. The information had not yet been made public. The S-rank adventurer, Akira, was designated as the one in charge of this mission. After some time in the forest, the monster growled menacingly. Akira asked, "Can you all see it? It's a B-rank monster. This monster is easy to defeat if you know its weak points." The monster lunged, but he dodged it just in time. Akira, on top of the monster's head, said its weak point is the lump on its head. He hit the monster with daggers at lightning speed. Akira asked, "Right?" They could see it for themselves. The girls were watching him with admiration on a live stream of the dungeon. After a while, they came out and the fangirls surrounded him, thanking him for the stream. Akira happily shouted that he thanks them for watching. He loves them all. Afterward, he got in the car and declared with irritation that it was terrible. It bothers him to have to interact with that trash. The driver told him he should watch his words. A message arrived from the bloody serpent. Akira checked the message saying they were trapped. Everything was going according to plan. He could enjoy it. He laughed and said it was great news. What kind of scum would they send this time? Now it was getting interesting. The driver asked if the adventurer who defeated the revenants would be there. Akira said with a smile that he was. He already wanted to see him in the red dungeon. A while later, at the hospital, the nurse thought that he had come with roses today. The protagonist entered the room of his sister, calling her by her name. Natsu was happy to see him and commented that those flowers were very pretty. The protagonist said they were for her and that there was more good news. Maybe they could cure her soon. She looked at her brother, surprised. Natsu pointed out that the doctor said the disease was incurable. The protagonist took her hands and assured her that everything would be okay. She smiled and said she trusts her brother. At that moment, the nurse was watching the scene, wiping away her tears. Afterward, Natsu said, showing something in the book, that yellow roses mean the fading of love. Aki was shocked. The protagonist left, annoyed from the room. The nurse thought that he still doesn't understand. It can also mean altruism. After a while in the park, near the hospital, he decided to call Alice. She asked how he was. He said that he was told she recommended him. Alice then asked about that job. She's grateful that you're accepting this mission. Unfortunately, she can't go. However, there should be other strong adventurers there like Akira, Bobosono, and Ichinoseru. These two are strong adventurers. Aki said he understood. The protagonist thought, so Akira has the assassin class. Then Alice asked if they could go on a date when it's over. The protagonist asked if she was serious. She insisted. He's very talented, just as she expected. She wants to get to know him better. The protagonist said he'll think about it. Alice said happily that he's so unattainable, it's even adorable. She'll wait for their date. Aki thought, this is the best time of his youth. After a while, the adventurer manager thanked everyone who came. Tonight, they will put an end to the nightmare of the adventurers. They will stop the PK adventurers. It'll be a tough job, but they'll surely succeed, and names him the leader of this mission. Akira introduced himself, saying they could count on him. The system window reported that Akira is an S-rank adventurer. His class is assassin. He said confidently that together they would win. The adventurers cheered and our protagonist joined in, clapping discreetly. Eru asked, isn't he the main character here? Depending on who she was asking, Alice hadn't said anything about it. Eru introduced herself as Alice's first student. The system window reported that Eru is an A-rank adventurer. Her class is Archer. She looked at him closely and noticed that Alice values him a lot. Eru said with irritation that she wasn't going to lose, though. Shirota Taiki asked why she was making. Alice said happily that he's so unattainable, it's even adorable. She'll wait for their date. Aki thought, A rank. His class is Alchemist. Eru asked why Alice would recommend such a low-rank adventurer. She noted that, values him a lot. Eru said with irritation that she wasn't going to lose, though. Shirota Taiki asked why she was making. A rank. His class is Alchemist. Eru asked why Alice would recommend such a low-rank adventurer. She noted that, thought in surprise, why would I do this? Are they messing with me? Just then, Akira was watching him with a mocking smile. A while later, on the plane, our protagonist was watching a video on a tablet. A miniature knight on the screen greeted him and said he wanted to explain the plan for today's operation. In the Ye dungeon, the rookie adventurers acting as bait are given instructions by a mentor. For confidentiality, they were not informed of today's plan. Blood Serpent and his team of assassins fell for the trap information that was sent and, such a fuss. Angrily, she told him to shut up. She introduced her ally. The window reported that Taiki is an adventurer of all these fish. That concludes the explanation of the plan. It wishes them luck. Then, our protagonist saw Akira calming the other adventurers. Aki thought that Akira had been the center of attention ever since they left. At this rate, he wouldn't be able to steal his smartphone. Eru whispered, "Is he really classless?" The protagonist said he was. She commented that was terrible. She noticed he was now watching Akira. Was he a fan of his? The protagonist said, "Yes." Such a fuss. Angrily, she told him to shut up. She introduced her ally. The window reported that Taiki is an adventurer of, differently, with the eyes of a hunter. It was as if he was waiting for the moment Akira showed any weakness. She was right. Eru claimed that. She commented that was terrible. She noticed he was now watching Akira. Was he a fan of his? The protagonist said, "Yes." Archers have sharp eyesight. No matter what he was planning, she would help him. Alice had asked her to. After. Suddenly, Eru bumped into Akira and she apologized. Akira asked if she was hurt. She said she was. Now they are planning an attack. The hunter team will go in right when the assassins appear, and their objective is to eliminate the skills of a former assassin to come in handy like this. The system window reported that the task was complete. He received a new reward. He got the cat's claw skill. The protagonist looked at Eru and thought that she was a real help, but there was something strange about her. Akira got a notification on his phone. The protagonist glanced at the phone's screen and thought that he now understood what was going on. A little later, a bus arrived, the dungeon entrance. Then, the branch manager pointed out that if the information was reliable, they should go on ahead, and they shouldn't hold back. They shouted that they needed to punish evil. After a while, Eru asked if he was sure about this. Protagonist glanced at the phone's screen and thought that he now understood what was going on. A little later, a bus arrived. His expression changed and he said he never imagined it would be like this. The protagonist put his hand on his shoulder and said they could handle it. He would think of something. Eru said he should look for a job. The protagonist noted with irritation that he did have a job. Akira shouted that he would lead them to victory. They should follow him. Miniature Knight on the screen greeted him and said he wanted to explain the plan for today's operation. In the Yi, Eru thought that she now understood why Alice liked him so much. Sometime later, in an old E-rank dungeon, the rookie adventurers were at the entrance when there was a rumble. Fallen trees blocked their path and PK adventurers appeared behind them. The mentor adventurer shouted, "Who were they?" He was suddenly crushed by a single spell. The rookies looked at the PKs in fear, who said it was time to have some fun. Akira said, smiling, that they were right. The hunter group shouted that they wouldn't let the player killers go unpunished. He, turning to the rookies, apologized for making them wait. The rookies recognized him and were happy, saying that if he was with them, everything would be fine. Akira asked, "Are you sure about this?" Suddenly, the hunters started losing consciousness and the rookies got scared. Akira and the PKs laughed maliciously. A hunter asked, "What did this mean?" He said, finishing him off with a kick, that only weak people bring trouble to the world. Akira said that in public he is a bona fide S-rank adventurer, and that he's also a popular streamer. However, they, useless trash, don't even know how much he hates them. He considers them damn parasites. The player-killer clan created Blood Serpent. In other words, it was him. They looked at him in horror. The killers shouted that they didn't need to resist. They couldn't defeat him anyway. Akira declared, brandishing his dagger, that it was true. This world doesn't need weak people. At the last moment, the protagonist blocked his strike with his sword. He asked, why was he still unharmed? The protagonist showed his phone and pointed out that he had no appetite. Eru thought she still couldn't believe it had all ended like this. Akira's face changed, and he looked at him with a smirk. He pointed out that his phone had been stolen. Didn't his mother teach him that stealing is wrong? However, for some reason, he didn't tell the other adventurers about him. He doubted what he had seen. The protagonist thought he was right. Only part of the message could be seen due to the lock. Besides, he had allies in the squad. From his pressure, he couldn't trust anyone. Eru shouted about how she hadn't realized there was another rat among them. She pointed her index finger at Taiki, saying he was the one who put poison in the food. Taiki said, taking out the substance in a test tube, that it was true. However, because of them, the plan changed. Akira clapped and cheerfully said that was exactly right. They really tried hard. However, what are they going to do together against them? Besides, one of them is a D rank. The PK laughed as she grew nervous. Then she said she would buy him some time. He needed to go to the office and report everything to Alice at all costs. Aki said he refused. Eru asked in surprise, what's that supposed to mean? The protagonist pointed out that his mission is to eliminate the player killers. She yelled, you're insane, you're only a D rank. The protagonist told her not to worry. It's better if you go get help. Eru furiously shouted that Alice had told her to look after him. The protagonist commented that her loyalty was impressive. Aki thought that he didn't want her to die. Akira, smiling from behind him, asked if they were done chatting. The protagonist looked back, startled, and turned around. Eru yelled, "When did he get there?" The protagonist figured it was the assassin's movement skill, Shadow Glide. He noted that he already knew. He was planning on killing these bugs. The new adventurer screamed as he approached Aki and asked if he could stop him. Akira shouted to the PKs that it was time to have some fun. The protagonist and Eru were surrounded by player killers. Akira shouted, as he disappeared into his shadow, that he'd better not be disappointed. The assassins attacked, firing arrows at their opponents. However, the defeated enemies were replaced by new assassins who were approaching. Eru prepared to shoot, but suddenly the protagonist yelled for her to duck. After crushing several enemies with a single sword strike, she looked at him in surprise. "Aki?" she asked. Now she saw what he was capable of, and she had doubted him this whole time. Eru screamed in horror. How did this happen? How did he do that? Suddenly, a capsule fell at their feet, breaking and releasing a poisonous cloud. They jumped back just in time. She realized they were now separated. Taiki said he would be her opponent. After all, they are both A-rank adventurers. It would be a fair fight. Eru yelled, preparing to fire her bow, that he is a traitor. He declared that in this cruel world, this is the only thing that matters. She said he was really getting on her nerves. Taiki declared, throwing test tubes at her, that only strength matters. Eru shattered the test tubes with her arrows and yelled for him to stop spouting nonsense. The contents of the tubes mixed and, to her surprise, a bright light suddenly flashed and then an explosion occurred. Taiki said that she couldn't have expected that. It was pretty easy. Suddenly, an arrow pierced his shoulder and he screamed. "What's wrong?" Eru asked. "You didn't expect this, did you?" She said with a smile that she was grateful for the smoke screen. He said with difficulty that he had truly lost. Eru shouted, turning to him. "You're still alive, right?" She saw him and said with a smile that he could be trusted after all. Akira suddenly appeared and asked, "Did you forget about someone?" The protagonist tried to dodge, but he couldn't manage to avoid being injured. He smiled maliciously and noted that, as always, he had to do it himself. The protagonist thought that his opponent was fast, as expected of an assassin. With his current skills, he wouldn't be able to keep up with his movements. Akira suddenly appeared and asked, "Did you forget about someone?" The protagonist tried to dodge, but he couldn't manage to avoid being injured. "He moves too fast." Eru screamed that he should run away. He doesn't stand a chance against him. Why is he smiling like that? Aki prepared to attack with his sword and threw it so that it was pinned to the opponent's shadow. Akira looked at him in surprise and the protagonist said he was sorry, but he had bad luck with his opponent. Then he kicked the sword and pointed out that it was no accident. How does he know the weakness of the shadow slide skill? The protagonist said he knows a little about the assassin class. Akira asked, "Are you serious?" He's a very mysterious person, so he knows what it is. He used his skill, and a dark energy burst from his shadow. The protagonist thought that it's an assassin's skill, a dark contract. He summoned a demon, so he's a contract assassin. Aki caught the dagger flying toward him and thought that it's the most popular class of the future, but he was unlucky. The protagonist grabbed the demon, disarmed it, and landed a devastating blow. The system window reported that it was a summoned demon, a messenger of the shadows. At that moment, the dark space dissipated, and the newbies shouted that he'd done it. Akira picked up his dagger from the ground and said that his knowledge isn't limited to general information about classes. It won't help him. He lunged at him with a mocking smile, and the protagonist blocked with his hands, but his opponent kicked him. Akira said that he can't defeat him as an S-rank adventurer, and that he is nothing but trash. Eru, readying her bow to shoot, told Aki that he should run. Akira glared at her and asked, annoyed, what was so funny? The protagonist commented with a smile that he was just thinking about how weak the assassin class was. Their attacks did little damage. The protagonist thought that if it had been an opponent of that rank with another class, he would have been dead long ago. Akira asked if he was serious about the damage, so he thought he had a chance to win. The protagonist said that of course he did. Aki thought that this was the moment. The protagonist opened the status window, and the system reported that he had a mastery level of 81. Eru asked, what kind of status is this? The protagonist said that the conditions to unlock the hidden class had been met. They looked at him in surprise. The system reported that the class was unlocked. The protagonist shouted that it was time to change classes. Aki thought, as his body was enveloped in light, this moment has finally arrived. All of this was for this moment. A window appeared, informing him that he now had a secret class, Master. The protagonist appeared with a new look, and Akira asked what was going on. Eru asked, could a person with no class really evolve into another class? The protagonist pointed out that the reason was different. It's simply that with the classless job, it's easier to raise the mastery level, which allows you to unlock the secret class. Master, she asked, what does that even mean? Akira said he didn't understand what just happened. However, changing classes wouldn't make him stronger than an S rank. Akira threw a dagger using the skill Snake Strike, and the blades multiplied in the air. The protagonist used craftsmanship and created a troll sword that appeared in front of him, repelling the daggers. He shouted, "How is this possible? Did he really just summon a weapon?" Aki said that he created it. If that surprised him, he should get ready. Suddenly, several weapons appeared around the protagonist. Eru thought, while her opponent was in shock, the magical power in each weapon was incredible. The protagonist asked with a smile, "Is an S-rank assassin ready to see true skill?" Akira shouted, "He created all these weapons." The protagonist confirmed that he did and that they were all originals, not copies. He thought, how could he create so many magical items? It's incredible. How can a D-rank adventurer do this? Aki asked what was wrong. Where did all his fighting spirit go? The protagonist crushed him with a huge sword. Suddenly, his body turned to stone and the protagonist thought it was just a clone, which was to be expected from the assassin class. Eru asked where he got such power. Akira, in his shadow, who had barely hidden himself, thought, he's too dangerous. The protagonist created a shining sword, luminous. Aki raised his sword and said to illuminate the darkness. Eru screamed when she saw the S-rank adventurer behind her. The protagonist left the sword in the air and created an ice sword, Frostbind. The protagonist used the swords and immobilized his enemy. Akira shouted, "What the hell is he? He was classless. How could he counter his skills so easily?" The protagonist stated that when attack and defense attributes are low and the only advantage, speed, doesn't work, his class is useless. He lost. Aki summoned more ice swords and struck down his enemy. He screamed before being destroyed. The player killers stared at their leader's body. The protagonist, surrounded by magical swords, asked, "Are there any more volunteers?" They threw their weapons to the ground and surrendered, raising their hands. The rookie adventurers shouted with joy. After a while, Eru said, holding out a bottle, that this was an antidote. "You have to drink all of it." Afterwards, she looked at Aki, who was tying up the PKs. Eru wondered how he became so strong. The protagonist touched his head and thought that his mana was draining fast. It seemed he had overdone it a little. She approached him and thanked him for his help. Eru asked, what the hell was that? Where did such power come from? The protagonist said he had already explained it to her. The MC thought that nobody knew about it now, and that it was no wonder. Even after 20 years, it was secret information that he had obtained with difficulty thanks to S-rank connections. She asked how he would explain it to everyone. Would he really tell everyone he was a D-rank adventurer? "You have to drink all of it." Afterwards, she looked at Aki, who was tying up the PKs. Eru wondered how he became so strong. Even after 20 years, it was secret information that he had obtained with difficulty thanks to S-rank connections. "I'll tell Alice everything and ask her to hide this information. I hope she can do it. By the way, about the hidden class, how does it work? Will I be able to unlock the hidden class, Master?" He activated a hidden class and defeated an S-ranker. At this rate, everyone would be talking about him tomorrow. Aki, it's especially difficult to develop the two-handed sword. Thanks to emergency quests and experience from his past life, he was able to reach the master level with the two-handed sword. It's difficult for others to achieve this in a lifetime. Eru said that he should tell her how to achieve it. The protagonist pointed, that even if he told her, she wouldn't be able to repeat it. She said he was just being greedy. The protagonist said that he could help her improve her archery skills. Eru asked if he was serious. Aki thought that in his past life he learned about legendary weapons. The protagonist said he knew things that would be useful to her. It's especially difficult to develop the two-handed sword. He knows this is annoying, right? The protagonist said he shouldn't tell her that. She said she didn't even have such a plan. Then, some new adventurers approached and thanked them for their help. They asked for his name, that skill, and his class. Eru whispered, smiling, that this was a test for his secret. Aki said with a smile, introducing himself, that he couldn't tell them everything, but he could tell them some things. After a while, at the Adventurers Guild, the screen reported some breaking news. The S-rank adventurer, streamer, and model, Akira, had been arrested. People on the streets couldn't believe it. The news said he was accused of attempting to murder a group of rookie adventurers in an E-rank dungeon. He was caught red-handed, attacking with dozens of allies. Snatching the tablet from the employee who heard rumors that a low-rank adventurer managed to defeat an S-rank assassin, law enforcement is investigating this incident. At that moment, the staff was trying to answer multiple calls in a panic from people who wanted to know the details of what happened. Afterward, they said that they needed to look. "Is that really him coming?" The protagonist asked if there was any work. The employee said that the situation is unstable right now. There will be a discussion about how to interact with him in the future. The protagonist asked, "What does that mean?" Alice said it's nothing serious. The protagonist called out to her, looking at her. She said with a smile that there are too many people here. "Can we talk somewhere else?" Later, in the conference room, Eru greeted him cheerfully, while the others in the room looked at him with displeasure. Aki asked, Does that mean she's here too? Alice pointed out that they've become friends. The protagonist said he doesn't believe it. She laughed at Eru's stunned face. Alice patted his head and said he must have had a hard time, but he did well. Eru's expression changed and she said it wasn't easy. The guildmaster, standing up, said he wanted to formally apologize for what happened. The staff bowed their heads, apologizing to Aki. He said they didn't foresee a player killer in the subjugation squad. Alice pointed out that Akira deceived them all, so it wasn't their fault. The guildmaster said he had no excuses. Aki received an additional payment as compensation. He would also be promoted to C rank. The protagonist said, thoughtfully, that he had been promoted to D rank just a few days ago and was already moving up to the next rank. Eru asked in surprise, "Has this ever happened before?" He was advancing through the ranks very quickly. She yelled, looking at his face, that he should at least be happy out of decency. The guildmaster pointed out that this had never happened before. To confirm his rank, he invited 3 representatives from the general director of the Adventurers Guild and an S-rank adventurer, in addition to Alice. The protagonist asked Alice, "Just like that? You were a representative?" Alice smiled and replied yes. She hoped he would understand how influential she was. The guildmaster said he had no excuses. Aki received an additional payment as compensation. He would also be promoted to C rank, in addition to Alice. The protagonist asked Alice, "Just like that? You were a representative?" Alice smiled and replied yes. She hoped he would understand how influential she was. "He's only level 11 and has a hidden class. Don't you all think that's very suspicious?" He grabbed him by his clothes and shouted through gritted teeth. "The police believe he founded a player-killer clan, Blood Serpent, and Akira is a suspect in several attacks on adventurers. And if he's a fraud like Akira, what's his secret? He has to tell us. He could force him if he uses his hidden class." The boss shouted that fighting is forbidden in the office. The CEO said he shouldn't interfere in this. Let him show his strength. He shouted in fear. "This kind of behavior is encouraged." He burped. "What are you plotting? You have to stop this immediately." He was scared, even after being promoted. He was right. This guy is a despicable liar like Akira. Then he looked back and saw many magic swords surrounding him. He muttered that it was a curse. Alice shouted, using her skill, for them to stop. He should give up. He clicked his tongue in irritation and left. She asked if he was okay. She was embarrassed that this happened. Guki was one of the weakest S-rank adventurers and had an inferiority complex. Desperate to maintain his position, you should forgive his behavior. He said it would be no problem. Alice asked with a smile if he was serious. The protagonist said everything was fine. She shouted that that was his skill, fabrication, right? Aru told her a lot about this skill. The protagonist looked at Aru, who was pretending to be innocent. He could force him if he uses his hidden class. The boss shouted that fighting is forbidden in the office. The CEO said he shouldn't interfere in this. Aru told her a lot about this skill. The protagonist looked at Aru, who was pretending to be innocent. He asked if he was going to share information about the hidden class. The protagonist said he wouldn't talk about it. The CEO asked if he would do it for money. The protagonist said he wasn't interested. Aki thought that for many adventurers, it would be a hindrance. Some people like Guki would suffer a lot if there were more people like him. Besides, such information would be useless to most. Then she said with a smile, asking for his forgiveness. She told Alice everything in secret. Aki had promised not to say anything. Everyone could go their own way. The employees said with a bow that they were grateful. Then smiling and turning to Aki, she said, "I have something to discuss. I wanted you to meet someone. This would surprise him." The protagonist looked at her in bewilderment. After a moment, Alice said that this girl wanted to meet him. The protagonist saw her and asked in surprise, "Was it really her?" After a while, they were welcomed into a restaurant. The manager clarified that they had reserved a table for 2, right? People were saying that this is the healer with infinite regeneration, and next to her, Naomi sadly apologized for the sudden invitation. He probably felt uncomfortable. He said he was sorry to hear that. Alice asked if that was the conclusion. The CEO said they were done, happily, and exclaimed that's right, they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Alice raised her hand and clarified that when she paired Naomi with a suitable party, she grew astonishingly, and here she is. Naomi raised her fists and said she reached level 15. Suddenly, Aru touched Aki's shoulders and shouted, "He knows the pioneer healer. How is that possible?" Introducing himself, that he couldn't tell them everything, but he could tell them some things. After a while at the Adventurers Guild, she grew astonishingly, and here she is. Naomi raised her fists and said she reached level 15, happily, and exclaimed that's right, they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Alice raised her hand and clarified that when she paired Naomi with a suitable party, Naomi nodded, closed her eyes, and shouted, "Let's have dinner together." The protagonist was surprised and thought it was unexpected. Alice crossed her arms, looked at him, and said, "Delicious food, a beautiful girl, there's no reason to refuse. Naomi is really very grateful to you." Aki thought about it for a moment and agreed. saying they would go. Naomi crossed her arms. Alice took out her phone and exclaimed that everything was decided. The rest was in her hands. She had already arranged everything. Naomi asked, "Is everything really ready?" Currently, Naomi is pointing at the menu. The protagonist smiles as he watches her and notices that she has changed and is now much more cheerful. Naomi replies that it's all thanks to him. Miss Alice suggested she party with a necromancer. If it weren't for the protagonist, she would have stayed the same. Naomi recalled her defeats and said that ever since she mastered the soul heal, everything changed for her and her surroundings. Aki, resting his cheek on his hand, asked, "Is it really soul heal?" The protagonist replied with a smile. He was surprised that she was so famous. Then he clarified, "You're Naomi, right?" She smiled. "It's an important support skill. In a world 20 years from now, this team composition will be standard, but in this world, Naomi is a pioneer." She closed her eyes, clasped her hands, and said that now she can be useful to her party and society. The people in the same situation Naomi was once in now see hope. Furthermore, the profession of healer has become popular. The protagonist pointed out that that's good. More healers mean more life. She learned a great skill. Naomi agreed with him. The protagonist thought that she was happy. He reached for the food and said it looked like everything was ready. "Shall we eat?" Naomi nodded and wished him a good meal. She tried the pasta and exclaimed it was delicious. Aki chewed his food and rested his hand on the table. Naomi asked if he didn't like it. He smiled and said that on the contrary, it was very tasty. He thinks his sister would like it. She's in the hospital because of a magic vortex. Naomi thought for a moment and said that healing magic had great potential. When she gets stronger, maybe she can cure his sister. Naomi, confidently, Naomi asked if he didn't like it. He smiled and said that on the contrary, it was very tasty. He thinks his sister would like it. He reached for the food and said it looked like everything was ready. "Shall we eat?" Naomi became embarrassed and stammered that she wanted to go with him. The protagonist seriously interrupted her and agreed. Naomi shouted, "What does this mean?" He clarified, "Do you want to go right now?" After a while in the pool, Naomi, floating happily in the water, mentioned that she didn't expect they'd be able to use the hotel's rooftop pool. Alex has great opportunities. Aki, swimming nearby, commented that sometimes you need to rest. Naomi thought she was referring to something else. Suddenly, she stood up in the water and, turning to the gentleman, asked, "Do you have someone you love?" The protagonist scratched his head and remembered his sister. He didn't confirm it and clarified, "And what would I need that for?" Naomi exclaimed that was very good. Aki asked, confused, "What happened?" Naomi got embarrassed, put her hands on her cheeks, and shouted that it was nothing special. She grabbed a ball and asked him to watch it. She commented that since they were in the pool, they could have some fun. Naomi threw the ball to him and asked him to catch it. The protagonist quickly ducked and caught the ball with his hand. Suddenly, he fell into the water and Naomi tensed up seeing him. She instantly raised her hands and burst out laughing. Naomi exclaimed that was very good. Aki asked, confused, "What happened?" Naomi got embarrassed, put her hands on her cheeks. He quickly pulled her into the water and Naomi closed her eyes and held her breath. They came up from the water. Instantly, Aki placed his hand on the wall behind Naomi and looked into her eyes. She blushed deeply looking at him. The protagonist asked her if she wanted to see something. Naomi asked, stunned, "What?" Suddenly, the protagonist jumped into the water and shouted that among adventurers, they nicknamed him Tuna. Aki asked them to watch him swim. The guy watched the protagonist swimming and thought it was quite a show. Naomi put her hands on her cheeks and said it was surprising. The guy, hearing this, was surprised and thought they were a strange couple. A while later, Eru, who hadn't slept well, yawned, opening her mouth. Naomi, the protagonist, and Eru gathered at the adventurer's office in the lobby. In the meeting room at 6:30, Alice clapped happily and exclaimed that a new team had been formed. She congratulated them with a smile. Eru clarified, "And for this they woke up so early." Suddenly, Alice said that now the three of them had to clear the B-rank dungeon, the Tomb. If they succeed, she will invite them to her clan's slaughter, the S-rank clan, Carnelian Rage. The adventurers said in admiration that it couldn't be. Alice agreed and pointed out that it wasn't that easy to get in. What would they say? Would they? Would they accept this? The adventurers asked, "Was this some kind of initiation rite?" Alice confirmed it, and the companions exclaimed that they could do it. Alice smiled and said that was fine. The protagonist thought that, in the future, Carnelian Rage was one of the most prominent S-rank clans, but when he went back in time, it had already disappeared. Aki heard it on the news. "Why did this happen?" Eru asked. He's thinking about his own stuff again. The protagonist doesn't understand the honor this represents. The guy watched the protagonist swimming and thought it was quite a show. Naomi put her hands on her cheeks and said it was surprising. Alice agreed and pointed out that it wasn't that easy to get in. What would they say? Would they? Would they accept this? The adventurers asked, but when he went back in time, it had already disappeared. Aki heard it on the news. Why did this happen? Eru asked if she would have to protect him again. Alice smiled, placed her hand on her head, confirming it, and said that the entrance of Eru was depending on it. The adventurer raised her fists in admiration and exclaimed that she would do her best. Naomi. He thought she believed Eru was in the clan. Alice raised her hand and announced that their test would be tomorrow. Everyone is free to go. She went to the exit and wished them luck. Alice asked them to prepare for it and that she would be leaving home to do her own thing. Eru asked where he was going. Suddenly, the protagonist grabbed her and Eru shouted. The protagonist noted that they should prepare for tomorrow. Eru angrily ordered him to get ready. Aki is the rookie here, not her. The protagonist responded that they needed training, and Eru asked what that meant. The protagonist smiled and let her go. He asked her not to worry. He had already thought of everything. Naomi clenched her fist tensely after a while in the C-rank dungeon, the ancient six-legged forest. Eru, walking through the forest, said she couldn't believe they went to a dungeon on their day off. She looked tensely at Naomi and asked what she was doing there. Naomi apologized sadly. Eru clarified that it was for the healer's sake. She knew that, right? Aki agreed and said the raid would be useful for her. Besides, it would give them experience, working together. Naomi sadly thought that she wanted so badly to be with the protagonist. She wanted him to count on her. Naomi looked at Eru, determined not to lose. Eru calmly picked up her pack and asked the healer to keep up and stay close. The protagonist brought his finger to his lips and asked for silence. He said quietly that it was a centaur. His companions whispered, "This is what they were looking for." Aki nodded. It was good to see one so soon. They smiled, at ease. They were very lucky. The system window notified, "Mission available. Heal a monster." The protagonist was surprised, thinking, again, there was something strange. He brought a hand to his chin and asked Naomi to come closer. Aki pointed at the centaur and asked her to be careful. Naomi agreed and walked through the grass. Suddenly, a grasshopper jumped at the centaur. Eru was very scared and ordered everyone to get down. She quickly covered her companions from the powerful mana beam that flew by. Suddenly, an arrow pierced a tree, and the adventurers looked at it in fear. The centaur drew an arrow on its bow with great fury. The protagonist put his hand on Naomi's back and noted that the opponent shot without delay. An incredible reaction. They were almost caught, Naomi clarified. Centaurs aren't usually aggressive, right? The protagonist said something wasn't right. Suddenly, the centaur was about to shoot, but Aki raised his hand, signaling it to stop. He shouted that they didn't want to hurt it. The centaur let out a sigh and fell to the ground. Naomi noticed that the enemy seemed unwell. The protagonist asked Eru to listen and asked if she heard anything. Eru looked away and shook her head. The archer asked, "Hear what?" Suddenly, a wound appeared on Eru's leg, and she fell. Her companions called out to her, telling her to be careful. The centaur was weakened by poison. Suddenly, Eru looked in fear at the enormous C-rank Venomect. Aki created the demon sword Muramasa in his hand and brandished it, protecting Eru. The Venomect rose quickly. The protagonist raised his sword and pointed it at the insect. Suddenly, dark smoke appeared, and Aki covered his mouth with his hand, thinking that the situation was serious. He shouted that it was poison pollen and ordered them to run behind a tree. The protagonists, they thought the opponents were strong, so they shouldn't prolong the fight. He suddenly noticed Hiro in the distance. She was sitting on the ground trembling, with purple veins on her leg. Several insects were hovering over her. The protagonist created a thunder blade, raised it, and scattered lightning bolts over the opponents. He covered his mouth with his hand and called to Eru, asking if she could move. Eru apologized, saying she had been too careless. She suddenly looked at her hands in great admiration. Naomi extended streams of mana from her staff and used healing and purification magic. The party members were surrounded by the healer's light mana. Aki asked if this was a group spell. Naomi disagreed and clarified that she cast the effect on each of them individually. She didn't have a spell to resist poison. She had to cast purification over and over again. The protagonist tensed up, realizing the magic was being used to minimize the effects of the poisonous pollen. The caster can't move, so they have to think of something before Naomi runs out of mana. The protagonist looked at Venomsect, turned to the archer, and asked if she could take the enemy down. He explained that Venomsect is a queen. She poisons her victims with pollen, then sends her minions. They roll the person up like a meatball and carry them to the nest. Eru shouted in great fear that this is so disgusting. He called out, raised his weapon, and said, "I'll take care of the small ones." He scattered lightning bolts around him and shouted that he was counting on her. Eru agreed with him. Several insects landed on the ground surrounded by lightning, leaving behind a dark trail of smoke. Eru fired her bow at the queen, ordering her to come down. The arrows pierced the wings of Venomsect. They roll the person up like a meatball and carry them to the nest. Eru shouted in great fear that this is so disgusting, but she needed to hurry. Suddenly, Venomsect flew toward Eru with its stinger pointing down. The queen attacked the archer and Eru fell to the ground, but suddenly Sentaro appeared behind her. Aki called out to her, and Eru yelled that she was fine. The archer quickly drew her arrow, closing her eyes to the bright light coming from Venomsek's stinger. Sentaro took Eru's hand. A large troll sword appeared in front of the queen's face. Eru readied her arrow and thanked Sentaro. She fired, and the mana-infused arrow pierced Venomsek's head. The queen recoiled, and Aki appeared behind her. He used the skill enhancement Thunder Blade and sliced off Venomsek's head with great force. The archer quickly drew her arrow, closing her eyes to the bright light coming from Venomsek's stinger. The protagonist raised his hand and said, "If it's not too much trouble, could you?" She agreed confidently, cutting him off. Naomi enveloped her staff in mana and healed Sentaro. The system window indicated, "Quest complete." The protagonist obtains the adventurer's key. Sentaro thanked Eru and handed her his bow. Sentaro smiled at the archer and walked deeper into the forest. Eru asked in confusion, "Does Sentaro want me to have this?" Suddenly, Aki called out to Eru and pointed at the bow, noting that it was one of the best bows in these dimensions. Eru was completely shocked and yelled, "What does this mean?" The protagonist said that he had told her he would help with her archery skills and that centaurs create these bows by combining them with their magical power. These bows are much better than human-made ones and very difficult to get, so the protagonist was going to steal it. Eru shouted that it was crazy. She looked at the bow smiling and noticed that, just by touching it, you could tell how good it was. Naomi happily asked if Eru had gotten the centaur's bow. It was very good and she was happy for Eru. The archer said, a bit embarrassed, that at first she felt a little offended seeing Naomi, but now Eru was glad that Naomi was there. The healer maintained the spell for a long time. It was amazing. Naomi cried tears of joy and laughed, saying she was happy. Eru asked in confusion, "Why is the healer crying?" "It's okay." The protagonist thought he had dragged them into this, but thanks to their efforts, they accomplished a lot. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed an arrow in a tree that had pierced an insect. Aki was surprised and wondered if the centaur hadn't actually planned on attacking them. He smiled at this realization. The next day, at the Adventurers Guild, Alice confidently raised her finger and exclaimed that the test was starting now to join Carnelian Rage. His companions shouted with determination that they could finally begin. Alice pointed out that they could do it and wished them luck. She waved her hand. Naomi turned to her companions and suggested that they give it their all. Sentaro took Eru's hand. A large troll sword appeared in front of the queen's face. Eru readied her arrow and thanked Sentaro. She declared that she would kill anyone who stood against them with her awesome bow. Eru asked them to trust her. After some time, in the B-rank dungeon, an underground tomb of sinister spirits, Eru tensed up at the sight of the graves. Suddenly, a bat flew over their heads and shrieked. The protagonist said, "It's okay, Eru." She confirmed it while stammering. Aki wondered where her confident attitude went. He pointed out that the underground tomb of sinister spirits is where various undead gather. Physical attacks don't usually work against ghosts, so it won't be easy. Eru screamed in fear because she didn't know that, and it's hard for her. That scares her. Eru confidently raised her hand and added that in the end, they're just monsters and they aren't in a horror movie, so they just need to beat them. Naomi clarified with a smile, "It's not that scary, right?" Suddenly, the hero exclaimed that it wasn't scary at all, but if Naomi was scared, she could hold his hand. The healer pointed out that she was already used to it. The protagonist thought it got noisy. Suddenly, the ground began to crack. The companions watched in fear as monsters emerged from the ground and shouted, "What is this?" C-rank monsters, goblin zombies, rose from the ground. Eru exclaimed confidently that she could handle the zombies. Naomi resolutely shouted that she would help. Eru suddenly noticed a dark silhouette near the tombs. She pointed at the banshee and shouted that someone was there. The protagonist said it wasn't the time. Suddenly, the ground began to crack. The companions watched in fear as monsters emerged from the ground and shouted. He stood there, surrounded by the falling body parts of his enemies. Naomi exclaimed that it was a sacred blade. Eru looked fearfully at the tombs and shouted that the banshee had disappeared. The protagonist held his weapon with mana and explained that a master's strength lies in choosing a weapon with the right properties. However, he stood there, surrounded by the falling body parts of his enemies. Naomi exclaimed that it was a sacred blade. Soul Devourers absorbed the mana from the zombies. Aki calmly said that they have less of a chance against monsters without a physical form. Eru screamed in terror that this couldn't be happening. She also uses physical attacks. We're done for. Eru begged the protagonist to do something, clarifying that he can do it, right? The protagonist apologized and replied that he was powerless here. Suddenly, Naomi raised her staff and spread mana to the sides. The Soul Devourers covered their faces from the light. The mana from Naomi's staff absorbed quickly. She swung her staff and used Soul Heal. The Devourers vanished instantly, and Eru exclaimed that it was incredible, a healer who kills monsters. How does she do it? Niami said with a smile that the soul heal uses the souls of the dead as a catalyst and turns them into a powerful healing spell. The excess healing is converted and increases mana. She learned this skill from Aki. Eru said, "That's why they call her a pioneer. Niami is amazing." Aki fled from the goblins and noticed the situation was serious. The protagonist smiled, thinking that the healing and mana increase exceeded his expectations. Niami is developing faster than expected. If she interferes, they. Suddenly, the protagonist heard a scream and turned his head to the side. Eru, surrounded by monsters, shouted, "Aren't there too many?" They needed to break out of the encirclement. Aru worriedly asked if the protagonist knew the way. The protagonist replied that he thought he had been here before. Aki quickly ran towards the wall. Aru asked him to stop and shouted that it was a dead end. The protagonist placed his hands on the wall and thought there should be a passage. It didn't exist yet. Resolutely, he turned his head and shouted that they would have to fight. Aru looked at the approaching monsters and shouted that there were so many of them. Suddenly, Niami heard something and asked, "Was that singing?" The MC looked at her and thought it was the Banshee. He didn't expect to find her so close to the entrance. Aki knows little about her. The MC looked at her and thought it was the Banshee. He didn't expect to find her so close to the entrance. Aki knows little about her, but even S-rank adventurers can die at the hands of the Banshee if they're not careful. The MC covered his ears and ordered everyone to do the same because her attacks are unpredictable. Niami asked, "What is this?" The Banshee extended her hand to Niami and asked for help. Aru screamed in fear because the enemy spoke. The Banshee sang for the lost soul to sleep and rest in peace. Aru pointed at her with great fear and shouted that it was the one they had seen before. The Banshee sang for them to go to their mother's house and sleep. She reached out her hand towards his companions and continued. The Banshee extended her hand and the companions were sent flying and fell to the ground. Aru looked back and saw her hand in the wall. She screamed that they were going through the walls. How is this possible? Aki tensed up and thought that he couldn't even believe skills like this existed. What is the Banshee plotting? Suddenly, the companions fell to the ground behind the wall and cried out in pain. The protagonist closed his eyes and replied that it was a secret. Suddenly, the Banshee went to the wall and extended her hand. All of a sudden, the Banshee took the hand to her chest and the protagonist raised his sword with determination. He noticed she didn't seem hostile. Why did she bring them here? The Banshee extended her hand to Niami and asked for help. Aru screamed in fear because the enemy spoke. The Banshee created a sphere of mana and asked them to free the souls. The figure of the boss appeared among the flows of mana. Aki looked at it and exclaimed that it was a soul stealer, a rank A monster, the boss of this dungeon. Aru explained, tense, that it was very terrifying. Niami asked, "What does free the souls mean?" The protagonist answered that it steals souls, absorbing the souls of the deceased, and uses them as magical power. For it, the dead are a source of magic, which gives it enormous power. The protagonist doesn't know why, but the Banshee wants to cut off this flow of magical power, and for that, she'll need the ability of Niami, Soul Healing. The system window notifies that Soul Healing converts the souls of the dead into a powerful healing spell. If there's an excess, the leftover healing is converted into mana. Niami, confused, said that with her ability. Suddenly, Aki looked at the Banshee and asked if she understood correctly. Right? The Banshee bowed her head. The Banshee created a sphere of mana and asked them to free the souls. The figure of the boss appeared among the flows of mana. Aki looked at it and exclaimed that it was a soul stealer, Soul Healing. The system window notifies that Soul Healing converts the souls of the dead into a powerful healing spell. If there's an excess, the leftover healing is converted into mana. Niami, confused, a rank A monster, the boss of this dungeon. Aru explained, tense, that it was very terrifying. The protagonist thought it was a secret room. The Banshee passed through the wall and Aru screamed. A hole appeared in the wall and the Banshee pointed to it. Aki said the boss was ahead and ordered them to move forward. The companions walked down the hallway. Everything would be fine. He ordered them to advance and his companions agreed. Niami closed her eyes and raised her staff. Eru asked, "How does the protagonist know so much if this is his first time here?" No, Aki wondered why the boss was attacking so hard. At this rate, they wouldn't last long. A shield protected the companions and the souls struck it. The Banshee raised her hand and used the soul curtain. The protagonist looked at her in surprise and Aru asked, "She's helping?" The Banshee turned her head and looked at the adventurers. The boss raised its lantern and scattered mana. The souls flew toward the companions. Aru, irritated, told it to wait. The protagonist noticed that the lantern was the source of the boss's magic. If they didn't destroy it, the attacks would be endless. The Banshee cupped her hands around the sphere of mana. Niami said the spell was complete and apologized for the wait. Confidently, she sent mana from her staff and exclaimed that they would destroy it. Niami used Soul Healing and the Banshee looked at her, surprised. The souls rapidly left the lantern. Naomi pointed her staff toward her companions and they exclaimed with joy that this was incredible. Aru confidently knocked an arrow and shouted that now they definitely wouldn't lose. She shot a fire arrow at the enemy. The Soul Stealer raised its lantern and created a curtain of souls. The Soul Stealer raised its lantern and sent streams of mana toward its enemies. The souls headed towards the lantern and the shield disappeared. This bow is incredible. Confidently, she readied a flame-wreathed arrow and called out to the boss, "You bastard!" The Soul Stealer threw a chain at him and shouted that all souls belonged to him. Aru watched in surprise as the chain wrapped around her hand. Confidently, she sent mana from her staff and exclaimed that they would destroy it. This bow is incredible. Confidently, she readied a flame-wreathed arrow and called out to the boss, "You bastard!" The Soul Stealer said that with her ability. Suddenly, Aki looked at the Banshee and asked if she understood correctly. Right? The Banshee bowed her head. He raised his mana-wrapped sword and ordered the boss to prepare to see his skill. The Soul Thief looked at the hand wrapped in holy power and screamed. He raised his mana-wrapped sword and ordered the boss to prepare to see his skill. The protagonist ran forward with a terrifying aura and thought it was time to finish what he had started. Suddenly, the holy power disappeared and souls appeared. The protagonist was surprised to see that the hand of the opponent was recovering. The boss looked at his mana-wrapped hand. Aki thought it was restored. Many souls flew at the protagonist and explosions erupted. His companions covered their ears, frightened by the noises. The Soul Stealer raised its lantern and sent streams of mana toward its enemies. The souls headed towards the lantern, and the shield disappeared. She swung her staff and used Soul Heal. The boss looked at his mana-wrapped hand. Aki thought it was restored. Aki raised his weapon decisively and clarified that Naomi was only controlling the boss. He swung his sword forcefully and cut off the Soul Stealer's head. His companions smiled and cheered. The boss's body rose up, vanished, and its lantern fell to the ground. She swung her staff and used Soul Heal. Banshee gathered the souls into a sphere. Soon, the lantern shone and a creature emerged. Banshee ran towards it happily. She hugged the creature, crying happily. The protagonist looked at her in surprise. Banshee smiled and thanked them. She disappeared quickly, leaving behind smoke and light. Aru asked what kind of monster she was. Naomi replied that she didn't know. Banshee gathered the souls into a sphere. Soon, the lantern shone and a creature emerged. Banshee ran towards it happily. Suddenly, the protagonist smiled and commented that this was funny. Even though he shot many projectiles, the boss didn't land a single hit. The protagonist broke the lantern and many souls flew out. Naomi said they were captured souls, absorbing the souls of the deceased and uses them as magical power. For it, the dead are a source of magic, which gives it enormous power. Banshee gathered the souls into a sphere. Soon, the lantern shone and a creature emerged. Banshee ran towards it happily. The journalist apologized for unintentionally overhearing the conversation and asked if Irua was in the Carnelian Fury. Iru asked, "What's going on?" Reporters shouted, "Adventurers conquered the dungeon, the cursed catacombs." Even S-rankers struggle with it. The internet was buzzing with comments. Their team up with the Pioneer Healer. How did they manage to do it? Passing the test with a C-rank adventurer wasn't easy, right? What were their strategies? Aki suddenly appeared. He asked in confusion what was going on. Alice replied that reporters had come to hear about their success. Eru, the protagonist, broke the lantern and many souls flew out. Naomi said they were captured souls. The companion replied that he was a classless C-rank. The reporter asked, "Is this the guy who helps C-ranks? Clearing it with a low-level adventurer is not easy." She is sure this could not have happened without his guidance. Eru waved his hands in irritation and shouted, "How many times do they have to tell you it was the protagonist?" Aki thought about it, and once again, it was something weird. After a while, they went up to a cliff, overlooking the burning city. Aki wondered, "What was that noise?" He asked, "What is it?" The assistant pointed to the window, and the protagonist was running down the street, breathing heavily. He gritted his teeth, believing it was about Natsu. Right? What were their strategies? Aki suddenly appeared. The doctor ordered them to continue the medication. The doctors next to Natsu shouted that help was needed. The doctor ordered them to continue the medication. The doctors next to Natsu shouted that help was needed to be let through. The doctor shouted that the protagonist must not interfere with the doctors, asking him to understand. The doctor ordered them to continue the medication. The doctors next to Natsu shouted that help was needed. The doctor ordered them to continue the medication. The doctors next to Natsu shouted that help was needed to be let through. The doctor shouted that the protagonist must not interfere with the doctors, asking him to understand. Aki asked in surprise, was this his phone? He looked at the screen and saw that someone was calling him. The assistant raised her hand and clarified that the protagonist should look outside. Confused, he brought the phone to his ear. She hugged the creature, crying happily. The protagonist looked at her in surprise. Banshee smiled and thanked them. He wondered if the symptoms had really progressed this far and there was still no cure. Alice's assistant turned. He looked outside. A helicopter was flying over the hospital. Alice, smiling, said that she had decided to bring the protagonist into her team. She stood on the hospital roof next to her companions. Alice took the watch with a smile and said that the protagonist is now part of Carnelian Rage. After a while, the door to Natsu's room opened. The doctors looked on in surprise and asked what was happening. People replied that the cavalry was immediately startled, and Alice asked what happened. He dropped the phone and ran towards the exit. At the same time, Natsu's room opened. The doctors looked on in surprise and asked what was happening. People replied that the cavalry, with their technology, they have treated diseases caused by magic that were previously untreatable. They have saved many lives. They are the best specialists in magical diseases. The doctors became tense and asked for help. Had arrived. The doctors shouted that this was unexpected. Could it really be a magical? They announced the diagnosis was a magical vortex and the severity level was 3. They will resort to an operation. With their technology, they have treated diseases caused by magic that were previously untreatable. They have saved many lives. To absorb the magic. After a while, the protagonist looked at the doctors and asked where they came from. They are the best specialists in magical diseases. The doctors became tense and asked for help. The protagonist grew tense and thanked them. The doctor said that Alice was the one who called. If he was going to thank anyone, it should be her. Alice gestured and told Aki not to worry, that she was happy to help. Aki asked if she helped her companions this way. Alice smiled, tilted her head, and answered yes. She placed her hand on his shoulder and, leaning closer, added that she was doubly happy to be able to help him. The protagonist blushed. Alice laughed and noted that the protagonist wasn't so serious anymore. Aki, looking serious, thanked Alice. He pulled away and was lost in thought. The protagonist looked at Alice and asked if he could ask her for something else. He clarified that it was for Natsu. He clenched his fists with determination and said he wouldn't remain in her debt. Alice was very surprised and noticed that Aki was asking for her help. She smiled, placed a hand on her chest, and added that it was an honor for her. What needs to be done? The protagonist thought that Alice had proven herself to be trustworthy. Her sincerity and determination were genuine. Perhaps he should reveal part of the secret. He trusted her. The protagonist knew a way to cure the magic vortex. He clarified that it was for Natsu. He clenched his fists with determination and said he wouldn't remain in her debt. Alice thought for a moment and replied that she had never heard of that class. Security held back the reporters. They called out to the doctor, asking for just one more minute. The doctor said that Natsu's condition had stabilized and they were improving. However, the illness was progressing quickly, and they didn't know when the next flare-up would be. Alice remarked that she had heard of it, but she didn't know it could be used like that. She turned and said that she understood he had many secrets, but wouldn't he want to tell her more about all this, though it's not necessary? Alice smiled confidently and raised her hand, exclaiming that even so, she wouldn't leave him in a tough spot. She asked him to listen and said she believed she had seen the person who changed the properties of the magic stone. Security held back the reporters. They called out to the doctor, asking for just one more minute. The protagonist agreed, and Alice said it was settled. She told him to be prepared, as the path ahead would not be easy. Serious trials might await him later on. After a while, a car sped down the road. It stopped, and Tyra got out. Suddenly, reporters appeared and ran over, calling for the doctor. The reporters surrounded him, exclaiming that word was out. Tyra had successfully developed another new drug. Tyra confirmed it with a smile, noting that it wasn't difficult at all. The reporters shouted that the doctor was creating new medicines one after another. Did he have some kind of secret method? Tyra smiled and adjusted his glasses, answering that it was probably just talent. He headed toward the entrance of the building, apologized, and said he had a lot to do. Security held back the reporters. They called out to the doctor, asking for just one more minute. A short time later, Tyra walked confidently down the hallway, thinking it was talent, a gift from God. An assistant opened the door and said the reward for developing the medicine was on the table. The doctor raised his hand and thanked him. Tyra sat down at the table and thought about how rich he was. He opened the box with the reward. The doctor took out a bill and, pressing it against his face, exclaimed that life was a success. He raised his hand with a smile and shouted that his talent was like the philosopher's stone. Suddenly, his phone rang. Tyra put the phone to his ear and asked his dad what was going on. His dad clarified, "You have some free time today. There is a person who wants to meet with Tyra." The son, not understanding, commented that this was unexpected and asked who it was. He raised his hand with a smile and shouted that his talent was like the philosopher's stone. Suddenly, his phone rang. "Why should I be bothered with this?" His dad said over the phone that this is important for him in his hospital. Can't his son meet with him? Tyra agreed, and his dad said he would send the information. Tyra looked at his phone and wondered who it was. "Why should I be bothered with this?" His dad said over the phone that this is important for him in his hospital, who put pressure on his father. The phone read, "Here, C-rank adventurer. Can't his son meet with him?" Tyra agreed, and his dad said he would send the information. Tyra looked at his phone and wondered who it was. The protagonist entered the room and thanked the doctor. The doctor said it was a pleasure to meet him and asked if the protagonist had an urgent matter. Tyra waved his hand and said he was busy, so he asked him to get to the point. Aki agreed and said he was looking for an alchemist. He was told that the doctor had the right skills. If Tyra doesn't understand what he's talking about, then the protagonist thinks he should leave. The doctor asked, "So you use connections to get to me?" He stood up, saying he didn't know who had tipped Aki off. His guess was correct. The protagonist was surprised and asked, "So you're the one?" Tyra interrupted him, agreed, and said that he might be the first human alchemist. Aki was very happy and thought that he had finally found him. Tyra asked what the protagonist wanted him to do for him. The protagonist asked Tyra for a cure. The doctor smiled and asked how much he would pay. The protagonist was surprised and Tyra clarified that his talent cost money. The protagonist didn't know. What authority did he have in pharmacology? Aki was at a loss and said he didn't know. Suddenly, and said that he might be the first human alchemist. Aki was very happy and thought that he had finally found him, but in exchange he could offer valuable information. He thought that this would be very useful for the doctor. Tyra adjusted his glasses and thought, what does that information even mean? How dare this man even say something like that? The doctor said that if the protagonist didn't have money, then the conversation was over. He thought he would scare Aki. Tyra smiled, created mana between his fingers, and added that the protagonist should leave. Suddenly, a portal appeared behind the protagonist and he turned his head to the side. Unexpectedly, the doctor jumped at him and raised his leg to strike. Aki instantly blocked the attack and Tyra shouted, "What is this?" The protagonist struck back with his hand. The doctor fell onto the table and money flew everywhere. He barked in confusion. Where did all that strength come from? This doesn't seem like the power of a C-rank adventurer. Tyra clenched his, gritting his teeth in fear, looking at the protagonist. The protagonist looked at him and asked for help. He said he needed Tyra's skills. The doctor shouted that it wouldn't happen. Why would he help trash like Aki? Someone who can't even pay? Why should he care? The protagonist noticed that Tyra loved money. The doctor smiled, caught the bill, and replied that it was true. After all, they are at the forefront of everything. Without them, a person is nothing. The protagonist smiled and pointed his finger at the doctor, saying that in that case, Tyra should help him develop a cure, and that he would make the doctor earn many times more than he earned now. Tyra clarified, many times more? Aki confirmed this and replied that he had the power to see the future. The protagonist thought that, although this wasn't entirely true, he could only speak about what was in his own future. The protagonist crossed his arms and said that, and that he would make the doctor earn many times more than he earned now. Tyra clarified, many times more? Tyra clenched his, gritting his teeth in fear, looking at the protagonist. The protagonist looked at him and asked for help. He said he needed Tyra's skills. Tyra looked at the phone and asked, what is he going to do here? The protagonist replied that he wanted to dispel his doubts by demonstrating his abilities. Aki confirmed this and replied that he had the power to see the future. The protagonist thought that, although this wasn't entirely true, Tyra looked at the phone and asked, what is he going to do here? The protagonist replied that he wanted to dispel his doubts by demonstrating his abilities. Tyra looked at the phone and asked, what is he going to do here? The protagonist replied that he wanted to dispel his doubts by demonstrating his abilities. Tyra looked at the phone and asked, what is he going to do here? The protagonist replied that he wanted to dispel his doubts by demonstrating his abilities. Aki confirmed this and replied that he had the power to see the future. The protagonist thought that, although this wasn't entirely true, Tyra looked at the phone and asked, what is he going to do here? The protagonist replied that he wanted to dispel his doubts by demonstrating his abilities. The doctor jumped at him and raised his leg to strike. Aki instantly blocked the attack and Tyra shouted, what is this? Put his hand on the portal and asked the doctor to remember that a lot of money was at stake. Tyra watched through the portal as the protagonist left, crumpled the envelope, and called Aki crazy. Tyra threw the envelope in the trash. The next day, on television, there was a photo of a doctor he knew. The anchor said that that morning, the former deputy was arrested on suspicion of a hit and run. It was reported that he hit someone with his car, then drove away and ran them over again before disappearing. Tyra heard this and was in shock, with a toothbrush in his hand. After a while, the protagonist put the phone to his ear and said he was expecting his call. The doctor shouted that it happened. What did the protagonist do? Aki smiled and replied that he did nothing. He simply looked into the future. The protagonist said he would send the doctor the location and wait for him there. The protagonist swore that this was a source of great income. After a while, the car stopped at a construction site. Tyra got out of the car confused and looked at the place where waste from dungeons is disposed of. Suddenly, Aki noticed that the doctor had arrived. Tyra shouted in anger, where is your promised great source of income? This is just a garbage dump. Here, they throw away the trash that comes out of the dungeons. The protagonist clarified that sometimes adventurers bring things with them. Sometimes they come out of the portal on their own. These are special materials that modern technology can't process, so they just dump them here without knowing what to do with them. But in 3 years, a method will appear that will allow for converting this waste into biofuel. Tyra shouted in anger, "Where is your promised great source of income? This is just a garbage dump. Here." Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. So they just dump them here without knowing what to do with them. But in 3 years, a method will appear that will allow for converting this waste into biofuel. Aki thinks he's a complete idiot. He was trying to trick him. The trash merged into a golem at great speed, and the doctor used decomposition and synthesis and shouted that the protagonist had decided to humiliate him. Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it, so they just dumped them here without knowing what to do with them. But in 3 years, a method will appear that will allow for converting this waste into biofuel. So it's all true. The protagonist raised his hand and created the enchanted sword. Aesop brandished the weapon and destroyed the golem. Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it, and shouted that the protagonist had decided to humiliate him. Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it, and shouted that the protagonist had decided to humiliate him. The protagonist wasn't asking him to do it for free, and Tyra listened to his conditions. The doctor didn't need money. Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. Aki remained silent, and Tyra stood up and agreed. Sometimes they come out of the portal on their own. These are special materials that modern technology can't process. The protagonist wasn't asking him to do it for free, and Tyra listened to his conditions. The doctor didn't need money. Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it. Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. Clearly, he wasn't an ordinary person. He adjusted his glasses and said that his potential had caught his attention, said that he was willing to help him. Tyra wiped his hand with a handkerchief and said that he remained calm. However, it still seemed strange to him. Could this whole pile of trash really be converted into biofuel? Said that he was willing to help him. Tyra wiped his hand with a handkerchief and said that he remained calm. Aki remained silent, and Tyra stood up and agreed. Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it. Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. However, it still seemed strange to him. Could this whole pile of trash really be converted into biofuel? Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. However, it still seemed strange to him. Could this whole pile of trash really be converted into biofuel? Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. Tyra looked at something on his phone and commented that for the moment the cost was more or less the same. In fact, the profit depends on how many liters they can produce. Tyra looked at something on his phone and commented that for the moment the cost was more or less the same. In fact, the profit depends on how many liters they can produce. Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it. Suddenly, Tyra turned around and saw the flying blades. He put his hands on the ground and used transformation. Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it. Aki remained silent, and Tyra stood up and agreed. He thought that this way all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Natsu should wait a little. The next day, Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it. Aki remained silent, and Tyra stood up and agreed. He thought that this way all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Natsu should wait a little. The next day, Tyra roared that he wouldn't forgive this, and the golem raised its fist. It threw a punch at the ground, shattering it. Aki remained silent, and Tyra stood up and agreed. If it were used for psychotherapy nonsense, it would be no help at all. Asterisk, asterisk. The protagonist said he was telling the truth. Aki remained silent, and Tyra stood up and agreed. Asterisk, asterisk, can they finally cure this disease with this, right? Asterisk, asterisk. He nodded and asked her to believe him. He is not wrong. Tyra was surprised by this. He began to secretly send a message to someone and thought with a sly smile that this guy is actually a hidden treasure. Afterwards, he put the phone in his pocket and asked what property needed to be changed. The protagonist looked at him and said that the heat property is what needs to be changed. Upon hearing this, he prepared to use his ability and said he is ready to begin. With his ability, all the departments of magical medicine were working to find a cure for this disease. The protagonist looked at him and said that the heat property is what needs to be changed. Upon hearing this, asterisk, asterisk, can they finally cure this disease with this, right? Asterisk, asterisk. He nodded and asked her to believe him. He is not wrong. The protagonist looked at him and said that the heat property is what needs to be changed. Upon hearing this, can they finally cure this disease with this, right? He nodded and asked her to believe him. He is not wrong. He was able to pull out the core, and it emitted a bright light, and he said it was complete. Can they finally cure this disease with this, right? He nodded and asked her to believe him. He is not wrong, that there was no problem. Originally, it had taken many years to complete this cure. Is the doctor here? Isn't he? Is it true that you found a cure for Manna's shock? He grabbed his hand with a very happy expression and said loudly that thanks to him he could save his little sister. He kept thanking him for this, and Alice was watching them from the side thinking she couldn't believe he could be so expressive. His sister was really important to him. She congratulated him and said she was very proud to witness such a historic moment. However, they should pay close attention to this achievement. This will cause a great stir in the world. The protagonist agreed and said that, if possible, he'd prefer to avoid a public announcement. Tyra was very surprised and asked in a loud voice what he had just said. Now is the best time to do it. He knows this is a cure for a disease that threatens all of humanity, right? His sister isn't the only person who is suffering from this. Sick people in Japan, or rather all over the world, also need this medicine. Alice said that he can foresee the future. He doesn't want the world to know about his power, right? At that moment, several people came running into the room and said there were a lot of people outside. Tyra went to the window and smiling said that if that was the case, then he should let him take his place. At the same time, a large number of journalists gathered near the lab and asked loudly, "Is the doctor here? Isn't he? Is it true that you found a cure for Manna's shock?" Alice asked what all that meant. Tara apologized to her and said it was just his promise. After all, he had offered him a way to earn a large sum of money. She was surprised by this. The protagonist agreed and said that he had indeed promised it. However, he doesn't have much time. He was the one who made this discovery and should be the one to receive the glory. Aki said he didn't want any of that, and that all the glory could go to him. She was still surprised by this, but she could still understand it. Tyra called him by his name, smiling, and told him not to worry, that he would keep everything concerning him a secret. He could let the media's attention focus on him. Afterwards, he left his lab, where many journalists were waiting for him. Everyone took pictures of him, held out microphones, and asked, "Is it true that your latest development was a cure for Manna fever?" He said that the correct term was Manna shock. A reporter asked. He could let the media's attention focus on him. Afterwards, he left his lab, where many journalists were waiting for him. "But unfortunately, your group had already found a cure, right, Tara?" He said they shouldn't talk about it in that tone. Conquering Manna shock was humanity's dream. They just wanted to contribute to humanity's efforts. The reporter was surprised and apologized for his rudeness. He turned around with a sly smile and thought that he had finally surpassed this organization of magic doctors. He lifted the rock into the air and began to do as he was told. And because of that, Alice began to freeze. "But unfortunately, your group had already found a cure, right, Tara?" He said they shouldn't talk about it in that tone. He started to think and said that the key was magic stones. There were still many uncertainties. "How is it that you won't need a doctor's help during the operation?" "This is nonsense," Alice asked with a slight smile. Tyra called him by his name, smiling, and told him not to worry, that he would keep everything concerning him a secret. The reporter was surprised and apologized for his rudeness. He turned around with a sly smile and thought that he had finally surpassed this organization of magic doctors. The next day, on the news, a reporter said that while the number of patients with this disease continued to rise, the Kaseki group announced they had developed a new cure for Manna shock. Tyra, as the company's representative, made a significant contribution to the cure for Manna shock. The protagonist was in his sister's hospital room watching the news when someone came in. He saw Naomi with Alice and said he was grateful they came. Tyra peeked his head from behind the door and said he was there too. The protagonist pointed at the television and asked if he shouldn't be on TV right now. He looked embarrassed and asked what he was talking about. The press conference was this morning. It wasn't live. He also finished changing the properties of the stones and came here to deliver them. Naomi looked at them in surprise and said they looked beautiful. He said they could start the cure. He asked them to tell him how to perform this operation. Aki said he was sorry, but that his role here was over. From now on, this is a mage's job. He called over to Naomi and said he would leave this to her. She said that as long as she could help him, he could count on her. Tyra became indignant and asked loudly, "How is it that you won't need a doctor's help during the operation?" "This is nonsense," Alice asked with a slight smile. "You're here because you don't know how to use these magic stones, right?" He got confused. Arrival. She said she was just a messenger. Her master was waiting for him. Aki walked over to Natsu and said, "You're in a lot of pain, aren't you? It's going to be okay. I'm here now. How is it that you won't need a doctor's help during the operation?" "This is nonsense," Alice asked with a slight smile. Immediately after that, a dark energy began to emerge from her body. He said with a tense expression that, once the blockage is gone, Natsu will recover immediately. He called out to Naomi, who was standing next to him. She understood everything at once and began to use healing magic. He continued to use his ability with all his might and thought about how he kept spending too much mana, which was how he'd gotten strong. However, his level still wasn't enough. He was very surprised when Alice came over and started to help him with her magic. She said with a smile that they couldn't fail. He thanked her for her help, and together, it was easier to handle this. Tyra was watching and asked, "Is the glow getting stronger?" The magic stones couldn't take it and shattered into many small fragments. He looked at them cautiously and asked, "Did it work?" The protagonist said that should be enough. Natsu began to regain consciousness and called out to her big brother. He was very surprised by this. He leaned toward her and asked with a worried expression, "Are you okay? How do you feel?" She nodded and said she felt like she was getting better. She took off the oxygen mask and said she didn't feel any pain anymore. He was overjoyed by this. He immediately hugged her, and with tears of joy on his face, said he was so happy. Tyra began to examine the fragments of magic stones and said, "So, by channeling mana into these stones placed on the patient, it's possible." He didn't have time to finish because Alice started leading him to the exit and said that they should discuss the details outside. They should leave them alone for now. A short time later, Natsu was running down the street and heard on the news that thanks to the new medicine from the Kanzaki group, the condition of seriously ill patients affected by mana shock has greatly improved and the mortality rate has finally started to drop. However, mana shock is still wreaking havoc, and the situation remains alarming. To increase the production of the medicine, the Kanzaki group is turning to common adventurers with a request for cooperation, asking for the moon magic stones needed to make it. The protagonist called her, and when she answered, he wished her a good morning and asked if she was okay. Natsu nodded and said she was full of energy and had just gone for a run. By the way, where is he now? At that moment, he was at an altitude of 8,850 meters on Mount Everest and said that now he was at the summit of the world's highest mountain. She was surprised by this and asked if he had arrived so quickly. He nodded and said he would start descending now. She admired him and asked why he decided to climb up there. He didn't tell the truth, and the system notified him that the task of climbing the world's highest mountain was completed and that a reward was available for him. She said with a smile that he was weird sometimes. By the way, where is he now? At that moment, he was at an altitude of 8,850 meters on Mount Everest and said that now he was at the summit of the world's highest mountain. He nodded and said he would start descending now. She admired him and asked why he decided to climb up there. He'll support her, right? Aki agreed and said he would help her get stronger. When he gets back, they'll go rock climbing together and get stronger. Natsu was surprised by this and asked, "Are you suggesting this so suddenly?" Sometime later, at Narita Airport in Japan, he was walking with a suitcase and thought the flight had been the hardest part. He was hungry. He needed to meet his sister and go get lunch. He noticed a girl in the crowd with a sign with his name on it. "Are you suggesting this so suddenly?" Sometime later, at Narita Airport in Japan, she was happy to have the chance to be athletic and decided to become an adventurer like him. She will collect moonstones for those suffering from the same illness, but she thought it was cool and it sounded fun. She wants to climb high on her own someday. She asked him to be quiet and said that her master had told her that he wanted to give him a warm welcome and thank him for finding a way to cure mana shock. He looked at her and asked what she was talking about. She walked over to the car and said that her master knows everything. If he's interested, arrival. She said she was just a messenger. Her master was waiting for him. She asked him to be quiet and said that her master had told her that he wanted to give him a warm welcome and thank him for finding a way to cure mana shock. After that, they arrived at a luxurious building, and he looked at it with a surprised expression on his face. They went inside, but she thought it was cool and it sounded fun. She wants to climb high on her own someday. Arrival. She said she was just a messenger. Her master was waiting for him. They left the airport together and he asked what would happen if he refused. Laughed awkwardly and said he asked her to stop joking like that. There's no way he would stoop so low. He is here for everyone's sake. She asked him to be quiet and said that her master had told her that he wanted to give him a warm welcome and thank him for finding a way to cure mana shock. After that, they arrived at a luxurious building, and he looked at it with a surprised expression on his face. They went inside. He should get in here. He noticed a plate of fruit inside and asked if he could eat it. She nodded and said he could eat if he wanted to. He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. He apologizes for such an insistent invitation. He was an S-rank adventurer, Kiraha Daigo, the leader of the S-rank guild. He apologizes for such an insistent invitation. He was an S-rank adventurer, Kiraha Daigo, the leader of the S-rank guild. However, how did he know it was him? The information was supposed to be confidential. He was about to say something, but Daigo suddenly grabbed his shoulders and exclaimed that no matter how much he tried to thank him, it would never be enough. However, he wanted to return the favor as much as possible, so if he agreed, he was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. But Daigo suddenly grabbed his shoulders and exclaimed that no matter how much he tried to thank him, it would never be enough. He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. He was the leader of a powerful clan on the same level as the Carnelian Fury Guild. He could already feel his pressure. What does he want from him? He was the leader of a powerful clan on the same level as the Carnelian Fury Guild. He could already feel his pressure. What does he want from him? He was the leader of a powerful clan on the same level as the Carnelian Fury Guild. He could already feel his pressure. What does he want from him? He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. He was the leader of a powerful clan on the same level as the Carnelian Fury Guild. He could already feel his pressure. What does he want from him? However, he wanted to return the favor as much as possible, so if he agreed, but Daigo suddenly grabbed his shoulders and exclaimed that no matter how much he tried to thank him, it would never be enough. He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. He was the leader of a powerful clan on the same level as the Carnelian Fury Guild. He could already feel his pressure. What does he want from him? However, he wanted to return the favor as much as possible, so if he agreed, but Daigo suddenly grabbed his shoulders and exclaimed that no matter how much he tried to thank him, it would never be enough. He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. However, he wanted to return the favor as much as possible, so if he agreed, but Daigo suddenly grabbed his shoulders and exclaimed that no matter how much he tried to thank him, it would never be enough. He'd been helping all this time. He shook his head with a small smile and said he was sorry, but he wasn't interested. He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. He was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded. However, he wanted to return the favor as much as possible, so if he agreed, he was glad she was okay, happy. He took out his phone, nodded, but he was truly sorry. However, if he had his own reasons, then there was nothing he could do. He'd been helping all this time. He shook his head with a small smile and said he was sorry, but he wasn't interested, whether he liked it or not. While he was away, the world of adventurers changed enormously. Jinji laughed and asked. He said, "Work together." Aki took the letter and was very surprised to see it contained a plan to conquer the abyss by 5 S-rank guilds. However, he wanted to return the favor as much as possible, so if he agreed, since this dungeon is extremely difficult to explore, but there is information that one of the adventurers who entered there managed to return somehow. The higher-ups covet the enormous wealth hidden in the abyss. They want the treasure. The protagonist smiled and asked, "Just like the adventurers, right?" He laughed. He agreed and said that if he already understood everything, then he should prepare himself. A great conflict was brewing and there would be a lot of commotion. However, he should remember that his guild would always be one step ahead. He was free to do as he pleased. Days later, the 5 S-rank guild leaders gathered in an office. They were M. Toguki, the leader of the Earth's Honor Guild, Mimi Startle, the leader of the Star Tile Guild, and Furunoha Jinji, the leader of the M Hunters Guild. Also with them were Daigo and Alice. The man from the association, who was sitting at the same table with them, said that he thanked them for gathering there. The agenda is in accordance with the notice sent earlier. They are asking for your help to explore and conquer the S-rank dungeon, the Abyss. There is still much they don't know about the dungeon and he hopes they will work together and join forces. Jinji laughed and asked. He said, "Work together." I wonder how many will actually try and agree to work as a team. Mimi looked at him and said he was a very cruel old man. He replied with a smile that she shouldn't be so naive. They just pretend everything is normal, but their gazes say a lot. Each one of them dreams of surpassing the others and being the first. She stood up and asked, "What's wrong with having ambitions? Everyone wants to be the center of attention, but now is different. The association demands that we cooperate. This old man shouldn't envy the young." Jinji smiled smugly and said that she wasn't that young herself. That's why her smile vanished instantly and she began to emit a powerful, sinister aura. She asked this old man. He was handed a letter which he opened immediately and said it also concerned him. "It seems there are a lot of people who talk nonsense. Are you challenging me?" Slammed his hand on the table and said loudly that they needed to stop. He said with a serious expression that they shouldn't waste time with empty words and that they needed to get back to the main topic. Mimi was outraged by this, but still she sat back down in her seat. Jin Yi said with a smile that, to be honest, his mouth was dry from so much arguing. He called over a girl from the association and asked if she could bring him a cup of tea. Alice sighed in disgust as she sat in her chair, thinking that the S-rank guild leaders still didn't get along and that the association preferred to ignore it. Now they were being sent to capture the Abyss. At the same time, the gate to the Abyss cracked open and the snarling head of Kurl Kincaid appeared from the darkness. The association member said with a serious expression that the Abyss, the S-rank dungeon, was the first dungeon to appear in this world. The probability of returning from there was very low and it didn't depend on the adventurer's strength. Due to the high level of difficulty, it was also called the final dungeon. They don't know what the conditions are to open this gate, since this dungeon is extremely difficult to explore, but there is information that one of the adventurers who entered there managed to return somehow. He also managed to see a vein of a magical ore similar to moonstone. Daigo said with a small smile that ever since the usefulness of moonstone was discovered for curing magical diseases, the demand for it has only increased. If this information is true, whoever manages to reach this deposit again and mine, it will probably be able to live a carefree life for the rest of their days. The association member said that it's not just about the moonstone. This place may hide resources with such power that they could turn modern life upside down. Mimi yawned, apologized, and said that maybe these stories about get-rich-quick schemes seemed boring to her. Yi chuckled and said with a smile that she doesn't need to pretend. She's just as interested as everyone else. She started emitting an ominous aura again, which made him smile smugly and ask her why she wouldn't stop acting like that. His smile suddenly disappeared from his face because Alice called out to that old man in a serious voice. She began to radiate a powerful energy and said that if he was so eager to play, she would be his opponent. Did it even matter who she was up against? Mimi turned away with a disgusted expression and Jin Yi raised his hands, saying he asked them not to look at him like that. The association member coughed to get their attention and said they should continue. They were in luck now. The gate was open and an opportunity presented itself. Everyone gathered here would have to penetrate to the deepest floors of the abyss. Guki was very surprised to hear this and asked loudly. He said, "The deepest ones. In any dungeon, there's usually someone who controls it, the so-called boss. What will happen if they encounter the boss of this dungeon?" The association member said that to clear the dungeon, they would have to defeat it. This surprised him even more, and he exclaimed loudly that it was dangerous. He was sure that they wouldn't reach the objective without casualties along the way. What would happen if they fought the boss blind? An association member said that's why they invested so much in them. Failure was not an option. If they weren't ready to take on such risks, it was better not to participate. Daigo, with a calm expression, said he didn't have to worry so much. There wasn't a single adventurer who didn't want to touch the treasures of the abyss. It seemed that everyone would agree with this. Otherwise, it would be problematic. Everyone was given secret documents and the association member said he would share all available information. They had to familiarize themselves. Guki, with disgust, began to read it aloud and said they would have to descend into the depths of the dungeon to face the boss. Mimi asked with a haughty smile if he was scared. Why did he come here? He, with an expression of disgust, said that she was annoying everyone present. Now she was making fun of him. She asked, was he in S rank? What was he afraid of? Maybe he should go back to F rank, where it was safer. He became more enraged by her provocation, smashed the table, and asked if she thought he was weak. Mimi jumped back with a smile and said that it turned out he already knew. Daigo watched them from the side and commented that it looked like a game of cat and mouse. His attention turned to Alice, who was standing and looking out the window. He called out to her and she replied with a serious expression that something was approaching. At that moment, a large monster came flying into the office, surprising those present. It immediately attacked Guki, but he managed to react and block it. However, because Alice called out to that old man in a serious voice, his attention turned to Alice, who was standing and looking out the window. He called out to her and she replied with a serious expression that something was approaching. Is this really the curse of the abyss? It's a curse that falls upon those who try to traverse this dungeon. They say the abyss has a consciousness and kills anyone who tries to explore it. The rumors were true. The association member exclaimed, "That's nonsense and just superstition." He was scared. The monster turned around and looked at him. It started to attack with its claw, but Daigo reacted and jumped aside with him. Alice turned to them and asked, "Are you okay?" He nodded, but the monster decided to attack her. She was about to counterattack, but she noticed the energy that appeared around the monster and stopped. And Jin Yi used his magic and said that those who desecrate tombs for their own gain will face danger, and that is just. However, if they decided to send this insect against them, it means they are underestimating them. He clenched his hand into a fist and cut off the monster's head with a thread of mana. Mimi looked at Guki and with a mocking smile told him he should try to learn a thing or two from this man. To their surprise, the decapitated monster said that it was interesting. It's just a scratch. Yi looked thoughtfully at the monster's missing head and wondered what it was even talking about. He saw a small stone that had been left behind and reached out, saying it looked like a good find. He would keep it for himself. The association member refused him and said that they would take care of it. Daigo started to think about the words of the monster and wondered what it meant by that. He looked at Alice and told her she should remember a few things. Had many encounters with him. She nodded and said she knew his son. He asked if he should tell him about it. She agreed and thought it would be a good opportunity for them to get to know him better. Jin Yi smiled and put the object away in his pocket and said it seemed they reached an agreement and it was time to go. They shouldn't be like a mummy catching another. Everyone should do their best. They would see each other later in the depths of the abyss. A while later, Aki was walking down the street looking at his phone screen and asked Alice why she needed him so urgently. He looked up and said it seemed like it was his first time there. He saw the Cornelian Fury Guild headquarters in front of him. He went inside and saw a guy asking a girl next to him if they could go to lunch together next time. He approached her, apologized, and asked if he could have a moment of her time. He wanted to see Alice and asked where she was now. They were surprised by this and wondered what kind of informal address that was. The guy asked with disgust what he wanted there. The protagonist said calmly that the guild master asked him to come, which is why he was there. The guy confidently said that he was probably lost, so he would give him some advice. It was customary to address the guild master with more respect here. He said with a calm expression that he wasn't lost and that he was a member of the guild. The guy asked with a disgusted expression. It seemed he was new. Then he should remember all the more that the lady is the leader of Cornelian Fury. He shouldn't be too familiar and should show her respect. You wouldn't want to make enemies on your first day, right? He calmly replied that he didn't believe that Alice would impose such rules. Besides, he had his own way of showing respect. This infuriated the guy more, and he asked if he wasn't taught to respect his elders. The protagonist said he talked too much and that he had lost interest in listening to him. Eru was passing by and noticed him. She called out to him with a smile, and a guild member asked with a worried look, "Do you know this person? They're about to start fighting. You should stop them." She asked with a calm expression, "Really another fight?" She turned to the newbie with a smile and told him that he shouldn't even try it because he wouldn't be able to defeat him. He asked with a disgusted expression, "Is that what you're telling me now?" He shouldn't think he can act like that just because he officially joined the clan. Eru turned around with a smile and said that he was just upset because she got ahead of him. Normally, member candidates go through a long selection process. The guy got even more indignant at this and said out loud that they both lacked tact. Disrespect towards the lady is disrespect towards their entire guild. He threw his fist and shouted that he would teach him a lesson for that. Aki managed to react to his attack and knocked him to the ground. He looked at him with a calm expression and asked if he had calmed down yet. He let go of his hand and said he hadn't come there for fun, but because the guild master had called him. The newbie was shocked by what happened and thought that it couldn't be true. How could an A-rank adventurer defeat him so easily? What rank is this guy? The protagonist was C rank, and Eru asked if he had been promoted again. He nodded, and at that moment someone nearby noticed Alice approaching. Everyone greeted her cheerfully and she waved back. The rookie who had just fought bowed and greeted her. She greeted him. Then she looked at the protagonist and asked if something was wrong. Eru smirked and said he was bothering the apprentice. Alice smiled and said she thought so. A lot of people here support her, so she figured something would happen to him. They need to talk, so he should go with her. She wished them luck and waved goodbye. Alice went up the stairs and asked if he could behave himself while he was there. The others were very surprised by what had just happened. They walked down the hall. She opened the door and said she was sorry for the wait. The guy who was already in the office said they arrived just in time. He must be the one. She told him a lot about him. He extended his hand and said he should let him introduce himself. His name is Kogami Ren. He's an S-rank adventurer, a water mage. Alice said with a smile that he is the brains of their guild. They shook hands, and he said it was a pleasure to meet him. He thought with a serious look that, as the lady said, he's quite strong. After that, he turned around and said it was time for them to start the meeting. The protagonist asked if they would be there alone. Ren nodded and said that the others had already started their operation. Of course, he will have to work too. However, there are things to discuss. First, the Minehunters plan to monopolize the Abyss. She said with a smile that, as she thought, this old man is doing everything as usual. He said they used part of the magic stone left by the echo of the mechanical dragon that attacked during the meeting. They did this to develop a new weapon and strengthen their position. The protagonist was surprised and thought. He mentioned the mechanical dragon. Alice said that now she understands why they are looking for funding. Ren nodded with a thoughtful look and said that it seems they are planning mass production. He listened to them and wondered what happened at that meeting. Was it better for him to stay out of it? He asked. Carnelian Fury also has plans for the Abyss, right? Hearing an affirmative answer, he asked if they wanted him to join them. Ren said that's not the case. They have already sent a group of S-rank people there, so he shouldn't worry. This surprised him a bit, and he thought that they are a pretty serious guild, since they sent a whole group of S-rank adventurers. Was it better for him to stay out of it? He asked. Carnelian Fury also has plans for the Abyss, right? Hearing an affirmative answer, he asked if they wanted him to join them. Ren said that's not the case. He handed him a tablet and told him that he would act as part of a separate group. Alice approached him and said that it was a very well thought out plan. A large number of people gathered at the entrance of the dungeon and said that this place was normally closed, so any means were valid. Aki said with a smile that it seemed interesting. He would participate after a while. Several people were carrying materials and asking loudly to be let through. The protagonist caught a guy who stumbled and asked if he was okay. It was the first time he would see S-rank adventurers. He nodded and apologized. He entered the portal and the guy looked at him and asked, "This person has a C-rank bracelet, right?" First floors, he felt a familiar energy. Is it really here? He didn't have time to get distracted with thoughts, but he feels like he has 10 minutes. He saw the stripes on the adventurers' jackets and thought that that coat of arms belonged to the Mad Hunters. The mission is secret, he should try not to be seen. All these adventurers are looking for magic stones. It's the first time he's seen so many people in the abyss. The protagonist kept running and a large monster blocked his path. He thought this was bad, but he didn't have time for that. Suddenly, one of the adventurers attacked this monster with fire magic. The mage who attacked the monster asked, "Is this your ally?" Niami agreed. He was happy to see her and thanked her for her help. The mage was embarrassed by this and said that in reality, she was the one who saved him. She blushed and said that Alice had told her everything. He should go on ahead and they would manage on their own. He thanked her for this and was about to run off, but he remembered something and came back. He approached her and told her to be careful of the shadows. Aki thought that he didn't expect her to be in the Carnelian Fury's separate unit. Considering there's an S-rank adventurer by her side, there's no reason to worry about her. He noticed some monster was chasing him and thought that they had already arrived. There's little time left and he can only run. He jumped over the columns lying on the ground. Considering there's an S-rank adventurer by her side, Aki continued running down the hallway and thought that a doppelganger was a monster that possessed an adventurer's shadow and copied their appearance. It could only copy their appearance, but once it possessed them, it would chase them until it was defeated. Even if there was no need to rush, it was an extremely annoying opponent. He noticed a staircase and thought that he could see the path to the next floor. He turned around and thought he needed to go that way. He started to go down the stairs very quickly, but time was running out. The door was already starting to close, but he managed to jump inside at the last moment. He was breathing heavily from exhaustion and thought that at least he had followed the orders from Alice. To deceive the hunters, he had to take the treasure from the hidden room without being seen. He noticed a staircase and thought that he could see the path to the next floor. He turned around and thought he needed to go that way. He started to go down the stairs very quickly, but time was running out. The door was already starting to close, but he managed to jump inside at the last moment. Although it was a hidden room, there was only one monster living here, the A-rank Abyss Guardian. The protagonist thought that his supreme ability could not be dodged. He used his skill and created the sword Anamaruk Mitsuna. Immediately after, he landed a powerful blow and shattered that monster's body. He struck another powerful blow, reached the core, and defeated that monster. He picked up the shiny object that monster left behind and thought that the task was complete. However, not even Ren knew about this mechanism. He inserted the stone into the correct spot and a door opened in front of him. Many Abyss Guardians began to crawl out of it, caves in the hidden room. Seeing this, he thought that Alice had helped him a lot, so he would earn a little more money for her. However, all the experience he gained would be for him alone. He was surprised because someone behind him said that this was incredible. He turned around and saw Jin Yi sitting on the body of a defeated monster with a smile, and said that he never thought a hidden room like this existed here. He found his path interesting, so he followed him. The protagonist looked at him and wondered how he didn't notice he was being followed. This old man is dangerous. Jin Yi said that he seemed to know this place well. Perhaps he had been here before. He replied with a serious expression that maybe so, but that he didn't need to know. He laughed and said that wasn't very friendly, since they were both adventurers. Why not share the information? Aki was attacked from behind by an Abyss Guardian, but he managed to dodge the attack. The monster immediately changed its target and ran towards Jin Yi, who was sitting nearby. He continued to sit calmly in the same spot, but the Abyss Guardian couldn't hit him because of the mana threads. The monster he was controlling started to attack the protagonist, who was surprised. The cunning old man remained calmly seated, used his skill, and told the stubborn man with a smile that he hoped he would live long enough to talk. He immediately realized what his skill was and asked if he had decided to threaten him. He thought asking for help was different. He laughed and said that was a very rude accusation. I accidentally ended up in this room with him, but I never thought an accident would happen. Anything can happen in life, right? Then he directed all the monsters in this room to attack him. The protagonist entered combat and began to dodge the attacks of these Abyss Guardians. He watched this with a smile from the side and said that he turned out to be quite agile. That's what it means to be young. One of these monsters jumped on Aki, but he noticed it and cut its core with his sword. Jin Yi noticed and with the help of his threads began to reassemble this monster. He said that if he told him everything he knew about the Abyss, then he would spare his life. He refused and thought that, since they were puppets, it was necessary to aim for the one controlling them. He ran to attack with his sword, but this old man deflected his attack in another direction using his threads. Because of this, the protagonist couldn't control his weapon normally. When he finally managed to break free from that grip and attack, Jin Yi had already managed to dodge and lift himself up with the help of his threads. He reacted immediately, using the skill Floating Sword Dance, and launched a wave of energy that managed to hit his shoulder. He landed on his feet and immediately clutched his wound. The protagonist jumped towards him, brandished his sword, and was about to use the skill Flaming Sword Whirlwind. To his surprise, he stopped in mid-air and couldn't even move. This old man said that this annoyed him greatly, that swordsman classes are extremely inconvenient for him. He used the skill Infinite Web and said that the more he moves, the more tangled he will get in the web. The outcome of this battle was decided from the beginning. Aki was worried about this and thought that he hadn't even noticed. He said that out of respect for him managing to land a hit, he'd let him go, but he had to tell him if there were any more hidden rooms, or tell him about his sword. He summoned it out of thin air. How did he get it? He refused to tell him and asked if he didn't value his life that much. He would wait until he wanted to talk. First, he would start with his fingertips. He was surprised to see a system window that said he had received a quest to crush an insolent. Jin Yi had already managed to dodge and lift himself up with the help of his threads. He reacted immediately, smiled, and thought that he would just stay quiet because he wouldn't understand anyway. Immediately after, he began to summon many different swords with which he was able to cut the mana threads. The old man was very surprised by this and asked where he got that power from. He didn't answer that question and controlled many swords with a serious expression. Yi looked at him with concern and thought that this pressure was immense, just like Alice's. He underestimated his power, moved his hand, controlled the monster, and made it hit the wall to try to open the door, but it couldn't. He was surprised by old man. He laughed at this, which surprised Jinji, and he asked him why he was laughing. The protagonist looked at him with a, "Get out of here unless you defeat all the monsters." He got angry about this and started to control all the monsters around. He immediately used the creation skill and forged the flaming sword. Durandal rushed forward very quickly and destroyed those monsters with swift sword strikes. The old man was very surprised by what happened, and the protagonist said that if he didn't know, this room is designed in such a way that you can't rank adventurers. Here, he rushed very quickly to attack him with his sword, and Jinji used his threads to create a shield in front of him. He didn't calculate the strength of his attack, and the sword easily pierced his shield and struck him in the body. Due to this attack, he died immediately, and the system notified him that the task was complete. The reward available to him is a growth magic stone. The protagonist looked at the bodies of the dead monsters and said that the work isn't finished. The host said, "Tonight is the final episode of Turn On. You're going to meet our main guest," and what was happening and thought that he didn't expect to encounter such a strong person among the low. The stellar tale of Mimi Milla and her profession as being an idol. The audience erupted in thunderous applause. The camera followed the idols during the show. Afterward, the interviewer thanked Mimi Milla for her work on the live broadcast, and her co-host also joined in the thanks. They thanked her for the interview despite her busy schedule. She replied, "You're welcome." Then, the interviewer added, "Mia not only fulfills the role of an idol, but she also actively works as an S-rank adventurer. She even has her own clan. How do you manage to maintain such a pride? A star who shines in the world, the first star in the night sky. And without a doubt, it's her. She can't believe they're the same age. What's her secret to maintaining her youthful energy?" She clasped her hands over her chest and explained that there's no secret as such, but that her energy comes from the smiles and support of her fans who inspire her and also from her competitive spirit. She doesn't like to lose. The interviewer was surprised. With a competitive spirit, Mimia brought her hands to her cheeks and suggested that it might sound arrogant, but she really doesn't like to lose. And maybe a glass of warm water in the morning helps too. The girl was surprised that it didn't sound like a joke. How scary. This is what she's really like. Then they thanked her for her work and time was up. High level of activity? She smiled shyly and thanked him for the compliment. The girl with the microphone said with a smile. Her subordinate, adjusting the huge bag on her shoulder, started to explain why. A few moments later, the idol asked in surprise, "What?" Old man Furuya gave up on the first level of the abyss. He's finally lost his mind. Then she smiled mischievously and said she already had another topic for jokes. Her subordinate continued and Mimia asked in surprise, "What? That old man is going to retire. What does he think he's doing?" Powerful waves of energy erupted from her body and flew in different directions. Because of that powerful aura, a plant that was in the hallway fell to the floor. Mimi left the dressing room and, looking at her phone, said that she looked tense in her interview. Why? Covered her mouth with her hand and apologizing, explained that her skirt had accidentally gotten stuck. How scary. This is what she's really like. Then they thanked her for her work and time was up. Someone might hear. But before she could finish, Mimia told her to urgently cancel all plans for today. She asked in surprise, "What?" And she turned to her and repeated again that she had already told her to cancel the plans. She wasn't going to make her say it a third time or she'd be fired. Then she walked towards the car and the driver opened the door for her, after which she sat in the back seat and rested her head on her hand, looking out the window. A few days earlier, Mimia was sitting tensely at the table. Furuya sat across from her and smiling, asked, "What do you say?" She picked up her drink with a trembling hand and said it was a funny proposal. He felt bad and replied that he would clean everything up immediately. Then they continued walking, and the subordinate said that if you made noise here, it's a cowardly way, but it can't be helped. Not even you can defeat her alone. And then Furia noticed her trembling hands and asked, "Are you scared?" She slammed the glass on the table and got indignant. Under the pretext of an expedition to the abyss, they eliminate Alice and take her place as leader. He ate and added, "They'll get rid of her with their own hands." She thought with irritation that she had risked her life so many times to get to the top, and the other one just climbed up there with a light step without breaking a sweat. The next second, the glass in her hands shattered and she said, "That bitch always managed to give me the slip." Then she glared at Furia and replied that she agreed. "That fool will regret getting in my way." He put down his chopsticks and smiled, saying that as expected, without breaking a sweat. The next second, the glass in her hands shattered and she said, "That bitch always managed to give me the slip." He then walked towards the exit and explained that he would tell her the details later. "You mustn't tell anyone." Back in the present, Mimiya bit her nail in anger and said, "You were the one who suggested it, you damn old man." A while later, under the pretext of an expedition to the abyss, they eliminate Alice and take her place as leader. He ate and added, "They'll get rid of her with their own hands. Stop him." Instantly, Mimiya approached and kicked the table, sending it flying. Furia managed to catch it with his threads, and Mimiya put her hands on her hips and asked indignantly, "Are you quitting?" She expected an explanation. "Are you kidding me? Ever since that girl showed up, she's always gotten in my way." So he was quitting. She sent a powerful blast of energy at him and said, "It's too late. You shouldn't think you can just undo everything." A magic symbol formed under her feet, and she added that he didn't need to do anything supernatural. He just had to deflect the blows. After all, he had to take responsibility for his failures. Furia smiled and said, "Another important piece appeared on the board. Aki, do you know someone like that?" She replied that she knew him from the meeting, and he explained that he was a C-rank adventurer who knew the secret passages of the abyss. He found the hidden room, and his class was something he had never seen before. She was looking up and didn't notice the young sprouts at her feet. She asked in surprise, "Aki was a C-rank adventurer? Did you really lose to that scum?" He closed his eyes and she added that she was disappointed. "It's better if he just stays a nobody, a worthless nobody." The next second, a powerful explosion occurred in the building. Passersby, seeing the flames, asked in surprise, "What was that?" Mimi opened the back door of the car and said, "We have to go." She crossed her arms and thought that she should have done it all herself. "Aki was a C-rank adventurer? Did you really lose to that scum?" He closed his eyes and she added that she was disappointed. Now, there was a vacant S-rank position just in time. She would destroy Alice with her own hands. Then she added that weeds must be pulled out by the roots, right? After a while, Carnelian Fury, the main office. The protagonist looked at the building in surprise and asked what was happening. The adventurer next to him looked at his phone's camera and replied, "Expansion. They say it's an order from Miss Alice." The next second, the worker shouted in surprise and the tool flew directly towards the adventurer. The protagonist managed to grab him by the shirt and pull him away as the tools shattered his phone. The adventurer's companion leaned over to him and asked if he was okay. The protagonist kept walking and waved his hand, telling them to be more careful next time. He then went to the reception and said that Alice had called for him. They informed him that she was waiting for him in the conference room. After a while, the protagonist arrived at the right place, and upon entering, he greeted Alice and asked if she had called for him. Then she set off a party popper and shouted cheerfully, congratulating him on being the MVP. He looked at her, and she added that the magic stone made them rich. They could finally make repairs to the exterior and expand the main office. He took off the streamers and said it was great. He got one for her and put a cookie in her mouth. Noi thanked him. Kagami Ren handed him a cup of tea and commented that he was something special, a rookie with intimidating prospects. With these funds, they could expand the team even more and improve their equipment. Alice confirmed this and added that they needed to gather more allies and become stronger, so they would finally investigate the depths of the mysterious abyss. The protagonist thought, the abyss and Karlkin, if I could find them again, then maybe I'd find out what happened back then and I could get my revenge. Then he asked, is she going to continue with her investigation? Alice handed him a drink and confirmed it. Based on the information everyone provides, she will develop new strategies. At that moment, the protagonist took a piece of cake and said that he also had something to contribute. She replied with a smile that she'd love to hear it. Ren thought that for a rookie descending into the abyss for the first time, he was handling himself well, as if he had already explored that dungeon before. I wonder what else he's hiding, and then the protagonist said that he had already fought a mechanical dragon. Back then, he was alone and could only land one hit. A perplexed Ren asked, him being a C rank, alone against a monster that's at least B rank? Alice burst out laughing and Ren put his hand on his head, commenting that it was hard to imagine, but it was unlikely that he was lying to them. Alice asked, an interesting person, right? The protagonist assured them that everything he had said was true, but it wasn't the type of creature you could find on the first few floors of the abyss. This monster was much more powerful. In the status, its name appeared as a rank S mechanical dragon. Karulke Alice noted that he really was an amazing person. Then she asked what kind of magical creature it was. He told her what he knew. After a while, Alice thanked him for the information, stood near the exit, and said that she owed him a lot now. He replied that she shouldn't worry, that everything was fine. She sighed and said that she felt like she didn't know him at all. I'll have to fix that. I should say something more next time. The protagonist walked forward and waved his hand, and then she added, "Oh, right. You also have an agreement to go out on a date." He stopped upon hearing those words and then continued walking. He looked at his phone screen and noticed that he was running a little late. He then replied to his sister's message and thought it was time to go home. The next second, Mimi appeared in front of him and said, "Good evening. Where are you coming from at this hour?" The protagonist noticed that there was someone in her shadow and said, "Her bloodlust is so thick you could cut it with a knife." "Who is she?" A magic symbol formed under his feet, and she replied, "Not knowing who she is the height of ignorance. It doesn't matter, because today he will die." The next second, a Diablo monster came out of her shadow and attacked the protagonist. Mimi appeared in front of him and said, "Good evening. Where are you coming from at this hour?" The protagonist noticed that there was someone in her shadow and said, "Her bloodlust is so thick you could cut it with a knife." "Who is she?" He managed to jump back at the last moment and thought that she was a spirit summoner, a pretty rare class. She pointed at him with her finger, and the next second the monster attacked again. The protagonist used his skill, took his sword, and cut the monster's wing. This should finish him. The next second, the monster behind the protagonist opened its mouth and began to concentrate energy there, absorbing everything around it. The protagonist's body was also sucked into the monster's mouth, and he yelled, "What?" Then the monster sucked him in, and Mimi said it was very easy to take care of him. He may aim for the sky, but he's still a long way from the stars. She jumped and laughed out loud. Meanwhile, the protagonist was falling and said, "Damn it, this place is inside Diablo's stomach, a completely isolated space." He thought, a closed space, like a sealing ability, can I get out with physical attacks? He instantly aimed blades forward and thought, I'm in the belly of a demonic dog. This is terrible. What do I do? I have to find a way out. This place is like an endless hell. Then he noticed a shiny object in his pocket. He then clutched the key in his hand. Mimi, smiling, said, "There's no escape from hell. Once there, he'll fall forever into the void. How could that old fool lose to a useless guy like that? A worthless fool. Well done, Diablo." She pulled the monster by its head and said that Alice is next. Then she looked on in surprise at the monster's belly and shouted, "What? How is that possible?" He disappeared. She furiously gripped the umbrella in her hands and yelled, "Where did he go? How dare he escape from there?" She twisted the umbrella in her hands and, irritated, stomped on the ground while screaming, "How the hell?" Meanwhile, the protagonist found himself in another place, and looking around, he thought he had made it. He looked at the key in his hands and thought he never would have imagined that the special dungeon key he had received as a reward before would be useful in this way. Good thing he remembered. This was something one of the veteran assassins had told him about in his past life. The assassin then asked him if he knew how to remove a seal. The protagonist replied that he didn't know how at all. The assassin raised his index finger and explained that to resist a seal, you need to use a seal. If this is an isolated space you were thrown into, you can cast a seal on yourself and move to another space to escape. The protagonist coldly threw the knife at the target, and the assassin shouted, "You should at least show some interest. This can be useful at any time." Now the protagonist thought he was right, albeit late, thanks to him, the special dungeon, the so-called trial space whose priority overrides any normal seal. Thanks to this, he managed to get out of a dangerous situation, but before the trial is completed, it's impossible to leave here. He turned around and saw a window that said, "Welcome to this special dungeon, the Arcee's underground prison. Trial. Defeat all enemies." A Jackal monster appeared. The protagonist, looking at the monsters around, said, "Everything has gotten even worse." Then, he turned his attention to the monster above that spat toxic liquid. The protagonist managed to jump aside, and this liquid began to corrode the floor. He thought, damn, if that saliva had hit me, it would have hurt. Then the monster lunged to attack him, and he used his Thunder Sword technique. Grabbing the sword, he attacked several monsters at once, slicing them to pieces. Then he saw the liquid on the sword, pulled his hand away and said, "Damn, how disgusting." The next second, a Jekyll grabbed his sword, lifted it into the air and threw it aside. The protagonist shook his hand, flicking off the clots of liquid, and he said, "A-rank monsters are pretty intelligent for their kind, of course." Then, he reached out to his side and a sword appeared in his hands. The monster looked at him in surprise, but the next second, the protagonist sliced it in two. He moved forward, attacking the monsters that stood in his way. Kikasal stood before him, ready to strike, but the protagonist threw his sword, piercing 3 monsters. He then turned around and saw more opponents, after which he ran forward with toxic liquid on his shirt and fell, crashing against the bars. As he fell, he was breathing heavily and then, smiling arrogantly, he summoned his sword and attacked again. After a while, he was on all fours, leaning on his sword. His body was covered in the liquid and he said, "Damn it." There was one monster left in front of him, but the protagonist stood up and precisely decapitated the enemy, after which he fell to the ground again and, leaning on the floor, breathed heavily. A system window appeared, indicating that he had completed the task of defeating all enemies. A reward was available for him. He thought, the reward is experience. The system reported a level up and he thought, I've already leveled up. Not bad. Then he clenched his fist and thought, my wounds and fatigue are gone too. What a relief. The system announced that the dungeon was closing, and he said, although it wasn't easy, the main test is still ahead. After that, he disappeared. Meanwhile, Mimiya angrily threw her umbrella to the ground and shouted, how could he have escaped? Then she bit her thumbnail and said, well, no matter where he goes, she will find him and kill him. The next second, the protagonist appeared behind her, and as she turned around, she asked in surprise, a portal? Where did that come from? What happened to him? What the hell? Why does he smell like that? The protagonist apologized and explained that he had just come from hell. She noted that he had used a skill or an item to move and seemed to have leveled up. Then she mounted, and once in the sky, she yelled, you pathetic worm, will you regret not having died sooner? A huge magic symbol appeared behind her and she screamed that he must disappear. The protagonist held out his hand and declared that he would come back until she got tired of it. The protagonist looked at her and thought, a spirit summoner, a hidden class unlocked by summoning 10,000 demons. The spirits have great power, but they remain loyal to their master. The summoner's heart defines their path to good or evil. It's a dangerous class. Then he used the skill Executioner's Blade. Mimi, bringing a hand to her face, noted that he had an interesting flavor, but she felt sorry for him. She used spirit summoning and the ground beneath the protagonist's feet trembled. She summoned a hell worm. A massive monster erupted from the ground and caught the protagonist in its mouth, who tried to hold the monster's jaw with his hand and shouted, damn it, bringing a hand to her face, noted that he had an interesting flavor, but she felt sorry for him. She used spirit summoning and the ground beneath the protagonist's feet trembled. You pathetic worm, will you regret not having died sooner? A huge magic symbol appeared behind her and she screamed that he must disappear. The protagonist emerged from the body and, holding the hole, said, I'm dirty again. Mimi wondered, bewildered, how could he pierce the worm's tough shell? She snorted and concentrated energy in her hands, screaming that he belongs to the earth. Then she launched a pulse of energy toward the protagonist and he thought, a magical charge. He wanted to jump aside, but the wound on the monster's body began to heal, absorbing his leg. The magical projectile kept flying toward him and the next second there was an explosion. The family, watching what was happening, said in surprise, what is this? This is a fight between adventurers. Meanwhile, the worm fell to the ground and Mimiya said, well done, Magoto. The protagonist stood up and she asked in surprise, what? He can move. The next second, several more spirits emerged from the magical symbols behind her and she said that he must surrender. These spirits are willing to die for her. Then she raised her hand and shouted, attention. The spirits see that. She wants you to tear him to pieces. You must bring her his head. The next second, the spirits launched their attack. The protagonist, sword in hand, looked at her in horror. The boy, pointing to the sky, said, isn't this woman Mimiya? These spirits are like monsters, they're scary. Meanwhile, Mimiya, sitting on the monster, declared that only she can shine on the stage. She won't allow anyone to steal her light. She believes that is enough. Her spirits must show her his head. But the next second, the protagonist raised his sword with the spirit's head hanging from it, and she looked on in shock. The protagonist asked, who called the ghost hunter? He explained that the more blood this sword drinks, the sharper and stronger it becomes. Mimiya, holding her head in her hands, screamed in terror, Suspi, how dare he? He replied that he didn't care about her stage, but for trying to take his life, she would have to face the consequences. She told him to shut up and keep his threats to himself. She created a magical symbol and said she would kill anyone who stood in her way. Everyone was to worship her and only her. She used the summoning of the spirit, Artorias, the Star Knight. The next second, the spirit charged. The protagonist thought that as long as he had Natsu, he would not lose. Then he swung his sword and easily decapitated the knight, grazing the adventurer's chest. She reached out her hand and said that this couldn't be, that she couldn't lose. She descended, flying, as memories of children telling her they wouldn't be her friends because she was a suck-up surfaced in her mind, and she thought that everyone had abandoned her, but she was not alone. She always had spirits with her. The next second, she fell on. Bleeding, she looked to one side and asked, what did I lack? Then she closed her eyes and the family next door continued to watch. The protagonist sighed and said that fighting harangues was pretty tough. She asked for it, but maybe he went a little too far. Whatever, what a long night. A few years ago, the referee announced the start of the battle. The opponent, looking at Alice, thought that she would be easy to defeat. Then she advanced, preparing to attack, but Alice sent her flying with a single blow, and the referee declared the end of the fight, and the winner was Alice. She loved strengthening her body. Before she knew it, she was already able to challenge people much older than her. She couldn't help it, feel flattered, but back then she couldn't imagine she would have to take over for her father. Then she got out of the car and was overjoyed to see her dad. Running towards him, she waved her hand and shouted, "There he is." The next second, a portal opened behind her father and the monster decapitated him. The point is, her father was killed by a monster in a single blow. At first, she thought she was doing it for revenge because she couldn't do anything back then, but now, she has many friends. She loved her work, and it became her new reality. She was standing in front of the portal, and at that moment, an adventurer approached her and said that all preparations were ready, that they could go in. She said that was great and thanked him. Then she looked at the protagonist and asked what was wrong. "He looks more manly now." He touched the bandage on his face and replied, "Well, it's nothing serious." Then the female adventurer, apologizing, asked, "But are you sure it's a good idea to bring him? He's a C rank." Alice replied that she shouldn't worry. He's stronger than he looks. Only he can keep up with her sword. The next second, she swung her weapon and the protagonist managed to dodge it at the last moment. The female adventurer held onto her hat against the wind that kicked up and said she couldn't see a thing. Alice, smiling, assured her that she knew what she was talking about. The protagonist thought that, even though he could see the sword moving, its speed still gave him goosebumps. And then Alice said it was time to go in and to gather everyone. The protagonist clenched his fist and thought he couldn't believe he was going to be able to fight side by side with an S-rank clan. He had never even dared to dream of something like this before. Now that he thought about it, he remembered the future. 20 years from now, the leader of Carnelian Fury, Alice, would die while conquering the abyss. The entire clan disappeared with her. Of course, that was still a long way off. But should she even be going? Alice turned to the female adventurer and asked if she had something on her face. She answered that she didn't. After a while, they entered the abyss. Several monsters came flying out to meet them, but Alice easily decapitated them. The protagonist thought that they cleared the first floor without a problem. After the second floor, they would reach the middle level, a perfect route with no wasted movements. Unnecessary, just as expected from the clan. Meanwhile, Alice, turning to the tired adventurers, said that they had worked hard. From now on, they wouldn't have to rush so much. They could rest a bit, that they cleared the first floor without a problem. After the second floor, they would reach the middle level, a perfect route with no wasted movements. Several monsters came flying out to meet them, but Alice easily decapitated them. The protagonist thought, on the lower level. Alice explained that it was a dungeon boss class monster. The adventurers added that the question remained the same. What was it doing here? She explained that they were in the abyss. Strange things tend to happen here. Strange things. In fact, she was expecting something like this. With that, she drew her sword and charged the knight. One of the clan members shouted. The young lady managed to deflect the boss's attack. Incredible. She continued the fight, attacking the knight. Just then, the protagonist joined in and also parried the attack with his sword. The knight went flying off to the side, and Alice looked at the protagonist. She thanked him and said she was fine. His help wasn't needed. He said the exact opposite. As the leader, she should conserve her strength. Then they rushed to attack and shouted that they would handle this themselves. The protagonist aimed his sword at the knight, but the boss blocked his attack. Alice also launched her attack. They moved forward, pushing the boss back. The adventurers, perplexed, shouted, "What's going on? Isn't he C rank? Why is he fighting on the same level as an S rank monster?" And the boss lady lied about her rank. Alice shouted that he wasn't bad, but that he shouldn't think it's unfair. He should let her handle the boss. He blocked the knight's attack and said, "No way," thinking, a monster with this level and power. This is what the abyss means. And so they continued the fight and attacked the knight again. The boss was sent flying backward, destroying the ground beneath him. Then he stood up. His eyes lit up and he took up his sword again. The protagonist shouted at Alice to be on alert. Is something coming? Then he was surprised. It created fog. Alice turned to her clan members and told them to get back. The knight waved its arms, spreading more smoke. The adventurers called out to Alice, and the next second, she was already behind the boss. She swung her weapon, but the knight blocked her attack and she was sent flying back. The protagonist couldn't even follow her movements. That's the strength of an S-rank adventurer, Alice. She raised her sword and said it was her time to shine. The knight appeared in front of her, and Alice said that the same trick wouldn't work twice. The smoke spread, and immediately she was surrounded by copies of the knight. She ran and thought, "Damn it." She stopped near the spears and deflected the blow. She shouted, "Damn it." The knight's copies surrounded Alice, and he thought No, she's not going to die here, right, Alice? Instantly, she spun around and beheaded them all in one blow. Afterward, her sword got stuck in the helmet. She tried to push it, but the boss grabbed her. She closed her eyes and with renewed strength, she cut the knight's neck. The adventurers watched in surprise as the boss knelt and said, "Princess, he failed to protect you again." A pulse of energy expanded from its body. The adventurers began to cover themselves with their hands, and Alice said, "An abyssal disaster is about to begin." The protagonist thought in surprise, "What?" She asked if they could report it. Her clanmate replied affirmatively and asked if anyone was injured. If so, they should pack their things and leave. The protagonist asked what an abyssal disaster was. She replied that, as she thought, he didn't know either. The protagonist thought in surprise, "What?" She asked if they could report it. This phenomenon was discovered recently. Then she looked in surprise at the vanished knight and said they must leave, and she'll explain everything on the way. The adventurers went up the stairs and Alice said, "They say that many monsters from the abyss are the souls of deceased creatures from another world." The protagonist was surprised. "What? Is that possible?" She said that she isn't even completely sure if it's true or not. What they do know is that souls that experience extremely intense feelings become intertwined with the magic of the abyss and are reborn as powerful monsters that then attack the people. If one of them is defeated, those feelings burst out and spread throughout the dungeon, which causes the monsters to go berserk. This phenomenon is called the calamity of the abyss or the curse of the abyss. They say this might be the cause of the overflow phenomenon. The protagonist thought, overflow. Come to think of it, it seems that in the first timeline, he had already encountered the calamity of the abyss. He was attacked by a monster, after which he beheaded the screaming monster. Where? He thought that at that moment he was surprised that the monster could talk. Then he wondered if there could be a connection. Alice replied that there are many other examples that confirm this theory. He looked at her and noticed she didn't look well. She replied that she was fine, and he said she needed to rest for a while. She said she could still walk, but the next second she collapsed to the ground. He managed to catch her and shouted, "What was wrong with her?" He turned around and yelled in confusion, "Why the hell did everyone pass out at the same time?" At that moment, the princess appeared before him and explained that the disaster of the abyss is not something you can see. She waved her hand, filling the space with her energy, and the protagonist thought it was the first time he had encountered a monster like this. She brought a hand to her face and said she didn't think he had time to argue. These people would soon die and become food for the abyss. He shouted in confusion, "What?" She spread her arms to the sides and added that if he wanted to survive, he should leave the abyss. Now, she thought that at least he could get this woman out of here. He thought, so it was because of her. Damn it. If she's telling the truth, he won't be able to get everyone out, but then the rest of the clan will die. What should we do? The next second, a shard of ice flew past the princess. She held out her hand and stopped it. Then she said, "Another daredevil who doesn't fear the disaster." Kiradigo approached them and said that he had already warned her. Alice couldn't challenge the abyss. The protagonist turned to him, and the dark elf drew in the crystals. Licking her lips, she said, "Dense, high-frequency magic. How marvelous." He replied that he was pleased to receive her praise. The protagonist was surprised. A dark elf. What should we do? The next second, a shard of ice flew past the princess. No matter how strong he is, without stability, he won't be able to get past her. The princess asked, "Did you have a plan, young man?" But it seemed you handled her without one. He smiled and replied that it was true. After all, it was perfect. She pushed a strand of hair aside and said that it was fine. She would let him pass, but he shouldn't be so frivolous, or before he knew it, the disaster would turn him to ash. He nodded and, turning to the protagonist, he apologized and said they would move on. After all, his people couldn't maintain stability forever and advised him to leave this place with Alice. The ice guard would take care of the abyss. The protagonist thought that it was true. It would be better to take Alice and leave now. However, if the Carnelian clan left with their hands empty, their position among the S-rank clans would diminish, and it was unlikely they could challenge the abyss new. Then he stood up and, holding his sword in front of him, declared that he wasn't leaving. He just needed to defeat her to advance, right? He thought that this way he would pay her back for everything. The princess asked, "Is this your final decision?" How arrogant. I wonder how long he'll last. And then she snapped her fingers and several more elves appeared behind her. The protagonist thought in surprise, more elves. The princess concentrated energy into herself and said, "In the darkness of the abyss, they are the best at navigating." Psychic charge. She sent several powerful impulses at the protagonist and he ran forward, trying to reflect the attacks. The next second, one of the elves jumped on him and tried to hit him, but the protagonist held his sword in front of himself, blocking the attack. Then he swung his sword and threw the elf back. He thought, what happened to their skin? Is it hard? The protagonist thought in surprise, more elves. The princess concentrated energy into herself and said, another elf waved his hand and released a wave of energy. The protagonist thought, damn it, the attacks hit him. and the other elf grabbed his head and, lifting him into the air, slammed him against the wall. The princess was surprised. Is he really that weak? But then she saw the elf's body pierced by the sword of the protagonist. Blood was running down his face and he thought he couldn't see anything. She asked, "What did you think of that abyss? This should demonstrate their power." Light scattered throughout the space and the protagonist had this thought. His memories seemed to start burning. It was the calamity skill, oblivion of the abyss. He grabbed his head and screamed, "No." He fell to his knees and the princess shouted, "Yes, that's it. That expression suits you. What's wrong? You've lost precious memories." The next second, several blades pierced the elves' heads and she screamed in surprise, "What?" The protagonist created several blades around himself and launched them forward. The princess dodged to the side and aiming her hand, shouted, "Shadow of Reason." Several magical pulses headed towards the protagonist and he realized he couldn't dodge them. He created a huge sword, but the masses of energy went right through it. The princess laughed and shouted, "No way. He won't escape it." The protagonist reached out his hand, looking in horror at the approaching pulses. Then he pushed off from the ground, swinging his sword, and rushed to attack, but just as he was about to reach his target, he fell to the ground. The princess noted that a human had surprised her. Now his mind is under her power. She laughed and the protagonist felt his head splitting in two. Where was he even? Upon opening his eyes, he saw his legs and the blade in his hands. He thought, "Did I really have this dagger?" He heard a shout, "You should open your eyes, stop sleeping." He bumped into the stairs, turned around, and saw adventurers. One leaned over and smiled at him. What a useless assassin. He looked at them in surprise and the mage said, despite being an S rank, he was useless. The knight commented that the assassin profession was so last century. The protagonist wondered why they were there. No, that's it. They had found him out because he was the weakest assassin. A monster jumped on him from the stairs and he used the skill Shadow Step. He instantly disappeared and reappeared behind the monster, attacking it. He believed the armor was too tough. The monster turned around and hit the protagonist, sending him flying back. Clutching his head, he thought, "Damn it." A knight approached and asked, "Why is he getting up?" The mage asked, "What's the point of his heroism? He's just a decoy." "Why is he trying so hard? Did he really think he could kill the monster with that pathetic thing and a toothpick? It's laughable, really stupid." The protagonist crouched on the ground and thought, seriously, why? He fell. He thought he could kill it, but he didn't have any great skills or high stats, since his class was the weakest one. Then he looked at the picture of his sister and his locket and thought he couldn't help her. He remembered telling her that maybe she would get better soon. He put his hand to his head and thought, it's not enough. What is this? This is weird? He doesn't remember saying anything like that. Just then, the knight turned to him and shouted, "Idiot, are you going to get up or what?" He replied that he was on his way. Then they continued down the stairs, and the knight said that the abyss turned out to be a pretty simple dungeon. The fighter put his hands behind his head and, agreeing with him, added, "Total cakewalk. It's been a long time since I've descended so easily into the depths of a dungeon." The mage said they had been warned about some kind of disaster. The knight waved his hand and told her to forget it. Nothing's going to happen. The next second, the mage looked at the hole in the wall and asked, "What's this?" Stepping inside, the fighter asked, "A bunch of coffins?" She added that she didn't like this place. The knight went deeper into the room and said there might be something valuable here. He suggested they look around. They then went to the middle floors of the abyss, the Temple of Darkness. The mage asked, "Have you heard anything about a place like this?" The fighter spread his arms and said no. The knight guessed that it was a new area and they should be more careful. They noticed a coffin that was bigger than the rest. The mage, placing her hand on the coffin, turned to the protagonist and told him to open it, and so he removed the lid from the coffin, asked the knight. The fighter asked, "What can it do?" He said that it was the first time he'd seen anything like it. "A magic stone." "Appraisal?" she asked. "Is it a valuable stone or a quest item?" asked the knight. The fighter asked, "What can it do?" She said, "Trials for those destined to become guardians of the dungeon." "Something like that?" they exclaimed in surprise. "And what does that mean?" She replied, "Who knows? That's all that's known about it." The protagonist thought, "This stone, I feel like I know what it is, but where did it come from?" Then the stone fell at his feet and the knight told him to take it. "Trials for those destined to become guardians of the dungeon." "Something like that?" they exclaimed in surprise. "And what does that mean?" The protagonist knelt and took the stone, and a window appeared in front of him. He said that it was the first time he'd seen anything like it. "A magic stone." "Appraisal?" she asked. "Is it a valuable stone or a quest item?" Why he was looking at him like that. He replied, "Nothing," and thought, "I'm the only one who can see this. Kill the boss of the floor." But he can't even face a normal monster, and it's the first time he's ever gotten a condition like this. This is very strange. Why does everything feel so familiar? And the fighter asked that there should be a guardian behind this door, as was mentioned on the stone. The mage replied, "No idea." The knight concluded they should go in first. The fighter took a stance and said he'd take care of it. The protagonist approached and asked him to wait. He turned and asked what he wanted. "You should step aside, assassin." The protagonist held out the stone and thought, "This isn't just a stone." The next second, the doors opened and the knight moved forward and asked, "Nightmare." The boss swung his weapon and slashed at the protagonist. He disappeared, turned, and looked in surprise at Aki behind him. "Wow, there must definitely be a treasure here." The next second, the boss in front of them said, saying that he must use assassin skills and kill the floor boss. Hidden conditions. The knight asked in surprise. The mage was outraged. "How insolent." "So this is the boss room. The guardian has been found. If you value your lives, you must leave." The protagonist thought that he remembered that armor. The hands of the warrior were severed from his body and he screamed in pain. The boss said, "First." The mage screamed in fear, "No." The boss walked towards her, then pierced through her body and said, "Second." The adventurer looked in horror at the approaching boss and held his sword in front of him to block its attack. He moved his sword again, trying to block the weapon of the enemy, but the next second his sword flew out of his hands and fell to the ground. He put his hands in front of him, breathing heavily. His hands were trembling in fear, and tears welled up in the corners of his eyes. He looked at the protagonist and the MC thought that the boss was too strong. This wasn't realistic. He couldn't do anything. The next second, the knight proposed defeating it and getting a reward. He stood up and shouted, "Dealing with a dead guy will be easy." Instantly, Natsu placed her hand on his cheek and said, "Brother, it doesn't hurt anymore." He was horrified by those memories, and the boss, approaching the knight, brandished its sword and said, "The third one, your lives will be an offering for your princess." He looked at the protagonist and the MC thought that the boss was too strong. This wasn't realistic. He couldn't do anything. The next second, Aki. He thought that Natsu was waiting for him, said that he wasn't the weakest and he could beat it. The protagonist kicked it, turned to the side, and asked if he was okay. The knight replied that he was and that it was none of his business to worry. He turned around and screamed in fear. Aki looked around and saw a warrior and a mage on the ground. The window confirmed his participation in the quest. The adventurer looked in horror at the approaching boss and held his sword in front of him to block its attack. He moved his sword again, trying to block the weapon of the enemy. "I never used that assassin skill before." He sighed and said that this was getting more interesting. He activated his skill and directed his companions forward. Then the boss brandished its sword, but the shadows evaporated. The protagonist thought that's where he miscalculated. You can't lose sight of the assassin. He circled the boss and brandished his sword. Then he attacked and landed with a flip. Aki thought that blow was too weak. He lacks determination. Suddenly, the boss approached. He jumped back and began to block the blows. The protagonist thought, "Here comes the knight." He shouted, even though the assassin was strong, he couldn't defeat the boss. "It's impossible." The protagonist stumbled and he thought, "Nightmare." The boss swung his weapon and slashed at the protagonist. He disappeared, turned, and looked in surprise at Aki behind him. The knight shouted, created a shadow, and moved behind him. The protagonist smiled and thought that the body fusion is a useful skill. He can't be defeated by strength alone, and he understands that better than anyone. The protagonist shouted, "Cloning." Everyone was imbued with his shadow, and Aki thought that the weak have their own ways of fighting. The adventurer looked in horror at the approaching boss and held his sword in front of him to block its attack. He moved his sword again, trying to block the weapon of the enemy. The protagonist shouted, "Cloning." Everyone was imbued with his shadow, and Aki thought that the weak have their own ways of fighting, confusing the boss. The protagonist thought that if you can't penetrate the armor, the best thing would be to strike the head. The protagonist shouted, "Cloning." Everyone was imbued with his shadow, and Aki thought that the weak have their own ways of fighting. Aki. He thought that Natsu was waiting for him, said that he wasn't the weakest and he could beat it. The protagonist kicked it. The protagonist shouted, "Cloning." Everyone was imbued with his shadow, and Aki thought that the weak have their own ways of fighting. The adventurer looked in horror at the approaching boss and held his sword in front of him to block its attack. He moved his sword again, trying to block the weapon of the enemy, brandishing his sword. The boss sensed him and turned around quickly, but he didn't have time to do anything because the protagonist had already pierced his throat. The boss caught his breath and said it wasn't bad. Maybe they'll meet again. The protagonist smiled and said that thanks to her, he would leave his past behind. He thought, shadow fusion. Suddenly, the knight came out from behind the pillar and asked, "Why didn't you run away?" He shouted, even though the assassin was strong, he couldn't defeat the boss. "It's impossible." The protagonist stumbled and he thought. The knight looked at him and said, "Chiom always envied your talent." At that moment, the protagonist's body was covered in mana and he teleported to the stairs where the princess of the abyss placed her heel on his head. She laughed and said, "This is what happens to stubborn children. He and his companions will be food for the abyss." She brandished her sword when suddenly Aki jumped up and cut off her head. Her body began to evaporate and she asked how this happened. The protagonist smiled and replied that he wasn't the same person he used to be. Someone is waiting for him, so he can no longer run away. It seems I can use this ability even after awakening. Could it be because of that item? He approached Alice and asked her to wake up. He shouted, "Alice!" At that moment, she was in a deep sleep, imagining she was sleeping on a meadow of flowers. Suddenly, the knight came out from behind the pillar and asked, "Why didn't you run away?" which moved Alice deeply. Suddenly, a huge eagle flew towards the lawn and wanted to take the crystal. Suddenly, the knight came out from behind the pillar and asked, "Why didn't you run away?" Amazing. He's special too, right? She hugged the puppy and suggested he go with her. Suddenly, she saw her father. He turned and asked what he wanted. "You should step aside, assassin." The protagonist held out the stone and thought, "Alice, is that a dog?" After a while, the assistant asked what they should do. They don't know where it came from. Alice saw a puppy in front of her and asked, "Who are you?" The puppy came closer and started to lick her cheeks. Alice's loneliness after the loss of her mother. He entered the house and said they should study this creature first. This is clearly not an ordinary dog. The assistant replied, "He listens." The father took the frame with the photo and remembered the loud crying in the hospital. "They're going to have a girl. Quick. They need a transfusion." The father asked them to hold on, and his wife took his hand and asked that they name the little girl Alice, that she always be happy. The father held the frame and said that everything was okay with Alice. She was his strong girl. She got good grades. She fought and stood up for animals. Years passed before dungeons appeared in their world, so back then there were still no adventurers or monsters. How nostalgic. Suddenly, Alice approached the shore of the lake and thought, "What is he doing?" So the puppy caught the bird. The eagle flew away and Alice shouted happily. Shiro barked loudly, running towards him, and Alice ordered him to stop. The hunter ruffled her hair and said, "Looks like he doesn't like it." He looked at her and said he knew what she was thinking. "Alice, is that a dog?" After a while, the assistant asked what they should do. They don't know where it came from. Shiro barked loudly, running towards him, and Alice ordered him to stop, missing the deer. The hunter laughed and said that not everyone succeeds on the first try. Shiro ran after the animal into the bushes and, a moment later, dragged out an enormous bear. The hunter screamed in fear. "What?" Alice ran to Shiro and hugged him. "Alice, is that a dog?" After a while, the assistant asked what they should do. They don't know where it came from. Shiro ran after the animal into the bushes and, a moment later, dragged out an enormous bear. The hunter screamed in fear. "What?" Alice ran to Shiro and hugged him, as was mentioned on the stone. The mage replied, "No idea." Shiro ran after the animal into the bushes and, a moment later, dragged out an enormous bear. The hunter screamed in fear. "What?" Alice ran to Shiro and hugged him. The crystal in the dog's belly attracted that monster. That's why President Alice was sitting in a chair and heard those words. Then she got up and went to the street where Shiro lay tied up. She gripped the blade and brandished it, saying, "No, she doesn't hate him," saying that only he and her dad knew what she was thinking. "Shiro, Dad, she loves them more than anyone in the world. May he forgive me, may he forgive me." Suddenly, the headstone exploded and a stream of energy erupted, so the puppy caught the bird. The eagle flew away and Alice shouted happily. The crystal in the dog's belly attracted that monster. That's why President Alice was sitting in a chair and heard those words. Who knows how many more people will die? She heard a voice that said, "Alice." The voice asked her to wake up, but she didn't understand who it was. Finally, she woke up, opening her eyes. The protagonist held her head and said, "Alice," but it's necessary for him to forgive her. A while later, she was sitting by the headstone, crying and begging for forgiveness. She screamed. He asked, "How are you?" Alice replied that she was fine. She'd had a nightmare. The protagonist was in agreement and asked, "This is a horrible place, right? But the main thing is that you're okay." Alice smiled and she said he seems to be the only one stubborn about staying. She said there's little time left. Should we continue? Aki replied, but it's necessary for him to forgive her. A while later, she was sitting by the headstone, crying and begging for forgiveness. She screamed. The group was going up the stairs and someone spoke. Everyone woke up. The guy fixed his hair and said he thought he was going to die there. "May he forgive me, may he forgive me." Suddenly, the headstone exploded and a stream of energy erupted. Alice smiled and she said he seems to be the only one stubborn about staying. She said there's little time left. Should we continue? Aki replied, "This is it." Alice interrupted him and shouted, "This is the deepest part of the abyss, right? And where are the others?" "Did we really get separated?" Aki said, "There's a high concentration of mana in the air." Alice grabbed her face and asked, "Thank God you woke up." Alice asked, "Kiyomi." Aki thought that if he had taken just a little longer, her soul would have crumbled. They have to go there. Maybe they'll meet the others on the way. Alice, annoyed, said they have no other choice. After a while, they were walking down the street looking around. Alice said something. but she didn't expect to see a city inside the dungeon. Aki thought, maybe it's another race that lives here like the Dark Elves. Of course, he's the strongest one here, Alice said. Then, onto the depths of the abyss. Shortly after, Alice frowned and said, that night, they fought him on the middle floor. The protagonist replied, yes. He thought he had seen him in his dream. It seems he's closely related to this dungeon. Suddenly, he turned around and saw the knight brandishing his spear. Aki ran forward and ordered them to be careful, but his hand went through the princess and his body was wounded by the spear. Someone shouted that the mechanical guards were out of control. The knight fell to his knees and shouted, Princess, why? Weren't they supposed to protect the city? The protagonist thought he can't even touch her. Alice shouted, Aki, is this reality or a projection of the past? Aki replied that he didn't know, but they won't be able to interfere with what's happening. Suddenly, a spear once again struck the knight and he looked up and said, Princess. The mechanical knight ran towards Alice, raised its spear, and she thought that if this is a projection of the past, they won't harm them. The protagonist shouted, Alice, watch out, they're real. She turned around scared and jumped aside. She got up and thanked Aki, not even realizing it. The protagonist said that among the illusions there are also real mechanical soldiers. He asked her to trust him, that he can recognize them perfectly. Does that mean they're in a magical space? Aki, the protagonist, pointed at the castle and said that from there is where the most mana is coming from. We must quell the mechanical uprising. The protagonist took his sword and said it was time to use it. He ran towards the knights and dodged spears. Then he attacked, took care of several knights, and Alice shouted, how fast? How can he tell them apart? Suddenly, scared people ran towards her without noticing her presence and knocked her down. She screamed in horror, asking them to let her through. Aki replied, the real ones are the only ones with shadows. The protagonist cut down another knight's body and thought that, in his first life as an assassin, to perfect the shadow step, he started to notice such things. The remaining knights were covered in dark mana and then they changed form. Alice asked, surprised. They changed form? The protagonist brandished his sword, thinking. Suddenly, a girl ran between them and fell. The knight rushed over and shouted, Princess. His body lay on the ground as the protagonist shouted, relax, the real one is here. He moved behind the knight using shadow fusion, used a skill. Swords shot out from a portal, piercing the knight's back. His body exploded, and the protagonist apologized to Alice for not letting her fight. Alice fixed her hair and replied, what's there to say? He was lucky to be there with him. The system window reported that the quest was complete and the reward was a magic escape stone. Aki thought about it, and once again, it was something weird. After a while, they went up to a cliff, overlooking the burning city. Alice reached out her hand and said she couldn't even feel the heat from the fire. It was all so sad. The city had been beautiful.